Chapter 26. Child, by the time you see this, you will already be an outstanding second-level sorcerer. I don't know what kind of hardships you have experienced in the mountains, but you should also find that you are actually stronger than you think. I can slowly tell you all my experience of practicing magic. But I have only explored so much about the secrets of the gods, and the rest is just speculation. Awakening the power of two sides, practicing body arts and magic at the same time according to a specific procedure is actually more difficult than practicing one of them alone. But according to Bear's message, I want you to take this difficult path. As a second-level sorcerer, if you can't meet the test of faith, I suggest you practice body arts of the second level while learning all kinds of low-level magic. If you reach the peak of the second level and the test of magic comes immediately, then my speculation is correct. In the various cities on the continent, you can't reveal your identity as a sorcerer, but being a warrior is a good cover. If you accidentally reveal your identity, you may be able to pretend to be a distant mage, but in a country of different gods, it can be dangerous. In the forest, you don't have to be afraid of the cavemen, but their arrows may be poisoned. Using magic in front of them was a good way to intimidate them, especially fire magic. Most cavemen worshipped fire. You may meet a tribe of cavemen, and if you are smart, you may be regarded as a god. It all depends on your luck. Although you can't easily reveal your secrets, you can teach this method to others. Those who are worthy of your trust or use, you can learn from them. You may think it is not right to do this, but I am sorry, I am doing the same to you. It is better than being muddle-headed in the world of mortals for the rest of your life. Even if you can't become a god, at least you can see the light beyond the sky. Keep going. When you pass through 3 layers of clouds and find a place where you can stay, I don't know when you can pass the test of faith. But from now on, pay attention to the weather around you and the sky in the east. When the disaster comes, you will see my next message. That was the end of Crazy Ole's first message. He did not teach Amon the details of cultivation, but just talked about what he needed to pay attention to. What made Amon very uneasy was that he once again mentioned a disaster, and the next message could only be seen after the disaster. What kind of disaster would it be? Since Amon couldn't figure it out, he didn't think too much about it. He settled his mind and continued to do what he had to do. The next day, Amon carried Schrödinger on his back and continued to climb higher. The towering peak seemed to be right in front of them, but it was still quite far away. Amon walked for another day. If he remembered correctly, he had already passed through 2 layers of clouds that surrounded the mountainside. Why did Crazy Ole ask him to run so high? This path was guided by Schrödinger, but for the past few days, the cat had been sleeping soundly in the leather bag. It did not seem to care where Amon went or how fast he walked. If it really wanted to lead the way, was it not afraid that Amon would go the wrong way? In such a complicated mountainous terrain, a slight mistake would result in a world of difference in the final destination. Just as Amon was thinking about this, Schrödinger, who was snoring loudly, suddenly jumped out of the bag and slipped into the bushes beside the road. It ran faster than a rabbit and disappeared in a flash. It was too late for Amon to pull out his sword to clear the way. In a moment of desperation, he jumped over a bush and summoned a gust of wind to help him stabilize himself. He quickly chased after the cat in the direction where it disappeared. Carrying a heavy iron branch, he jumped so high and so far in an instant, and landed so steadily. Amon did not realize that his physical cultivation was quite good. There was no trace of the cat in front of him, but Amon saw footprints left by leather boots again, and they were the same old boots that were almost worn out. Then he heard movement in the distance. He ran in the direction of the sound, went around a ridge, and saw Schrödinger looking forward from under a big tree. From the valley came the roar of a beast and the shout of a man. Not only was the cat willing to walk on its own, but it had also learned to watch. Amon walked up to Schrödinger and looked forward. He could not help but be shocked. In front of him was a horseshoe-shaped valley, with a pool half surrounded by steep cliffs on 3 sides. A man was standing on the slope of the cliff, waving a long sword, and was being attacked by several huge ironbacks. Amon had seen ironbacks before. They were covered with scale-like cuticle, which was very hard, like iron armor. They were omnivores. They ate termites in the jungle, fish and shrimp in the mud, and often swallowed iron-rich silt to help with digestion. Sometimes they also caught some small animals. In the feces of the ironbacks, it was possible to find the best fine iron sand. The average adult ironbacks were only more than 3 feet long, and although they were strong, they were not too terrible. But the ironbacks that were attacking the man now were 10 feet long, and Amon did not know what kind of mutation they were. Amon sucked in a breath of cold air as soon as he saw it. It was the first time he had seen a beast that could use a similar instinct to magic. The shell of the ironbacks was hard, but their movements were not flexible enough, and it was generally impossible for them to climb steep mountain walls. The young man who was being besieged seemed to know this too. He may have alarmed a few giant mutated ironbacks at the edge of the pool, then climbed halfway up the mountain wall in an attempt to avoid them. Unexpectedly, those ironbacks also climbed up. Amon sensed a fluctuation of elemental power. The huge ironbacks could actually use a natural skill similar to earth elemental magic to attach their bodies to the rocks, making them heavier and more powerful. And they were also far more flexible than the average ironbacks. Their sharp teeth and claws were deadly weapons, and the sweep of their long tails actually carried a strange power. This power made people nearby feel a sense of oppression, feel their bodies become heavy, and their movements become slow. If they were not careful and dodged slowly, they might be swept by the long iron whip-like tail and broken bones. Although Amon had not yet begun to practice earth elemental magic, he had already memorized the relevant incantations and the various characteristics of the power used, and understood the mystery at a glance. The man who was fighting the ironbacks was also very skilled. He waved a long sword so that the wind and rain could not penetrate it, and there was a faint misty halo around it. Being able to stimulate the power of the bloodline through the weapon meant that he was already an advanced warrior. Although the shell of the mutated ironbacks was extremely hard and not afraid of ordinary swords, they were very afraid of the faint mist on the man's sword, especially the eyes and the weak white skin under the abdomen. They did not dare to directly face the edge of the sword. When the ironbacks attacked, they needed to raise their bodies, open their fangs, and raise their claws, so the softer skin below the neck would be exposed. The man was attacking this point, so he could fight evenly with the 3 ironbacks surrounding him. When Amon arrived, the battle was at its fiercest, but he could see at a glance that the man was in danger. These mutated ironbacks seemed to be very smart, and even had simple intelligence. They knew how to cooperate to besiege. 3 were in the front to attract attention, and 1 quietly made a sneak attack from the rear. There were 3 ironback beasts besieging the man on both sides and below, completely entangling him, while another ironback beast had quietly climbed to the top of the cliff, silently raising its long iron tail on a protruding rock. Even if the man looked up, his line of sight was blocked by the protruding rock above, and he could not see anything. This long tail fell with heavy force and would sweep directly onto his head. The man who was surrounded on 3 sides could not escape in any way. It was too late for someone to warn him, but at this moment, an unexpected situation happened. The ironback high up raised its tail and took a step forward, grasping the rock, and was about to exert force, but suddenly its foot slipped and half of its body fell down. The edge of the rock was inexplicably covered with a layer of ice, which was not only unusually slippery but also bitterly cold, which was the most unbearable feeling for reptile beasts. The mutant ironbacks could use an instinct similar to earth elemental magic, and as soon as its body stopped, the layer of ice broke. But the broken ice immediately turned into a sharp ice crystal, piercing the soft skin under its chest and abdomen. Although it did not pierce through, the pain was unbearable for a moment. The ironback wanted to shrink back and stand firm again, but a gust of wind rolled up on the rock, swirling around its raised long tail and swinging it hard to one side. The long tail of the ironback was an important organ to maintain the balance of the body. A series of exquisite magic dealt with the behemoth standing on a narrow rock, and it finally could not maintain its balance and fell from the rock. Coincidentally, it happened to fall on another ironback on the left below, and the two ironbacks rolled together into the pool at the foot of the mountain, their hard shells hitting the rock making a lot of noise and stirring up huge waves in the pool. The man who was fighting fiercely was startled by this sudden change, and was almost scratched by the sharp claws of the behemoth on the right. A gust of wind condensed into a sharp wind blade in mid-air and cut the claws of the iron back. A layer of yellow and black light appeared on the surface of the sharp claws, and not even a mark was left on the claws. How hard! Taking advantage of this delay, the man had already jumped to the left with a shout, stood firm, and slashed at the iron back in the middle with his sword. The haze of light on the sword was thicker than ever, almost condensing into a shiny sheath. This sword was much more powerful than the wind blade condensed by Amon. The iron back that was pouncing up could not avoid it and stretched out its front claws to block, but one of its claws was cut off abruptly, and it let out a deafening roar of pain. Seeing that the situation was not good, the two iron backs actually rolled down the mountain wall and fell into the pool, and did not show their heads for a long time. Even a fool would know that a mage had just saved him. As soon as he turned his head, he saw Amon, who had already walked out of the bushes. He hurriedly knelt on one knee with his sword in hand and saluted, "I didn't expect to meet a noble mage here. My name is Madanzo, a 4th-level warrior. Thank you for saving my life." Chapter 27. Are you a native of Igut? You have a cat with you, and you even cook for it first. Metatro asked Amon when they were camping at night. He had short, curly, golden brown hair. His skin was very white, and his nose was high and straight. He was very handsome. In the eyes of most girls in the world, his smile must be very charming, and his teeth were very white and neat. Amon asked in confusion, "Why is the one who cooks for the cat first a native of Igut?" Madanzo replied, "The people of Igut worship cats and regard them as the incarnation of the gods. That's the only reason why they love cats so much. Aren't you one of them?" When he saw that the mage who saved him was so young, he was also surprised. However, Amon did not take the initiative to introduce himself. Amon smiled and replied, "Oh, this cat is a friend of an elder of mine. He asked me to take good care of it. I am indeed from Igut, and my name is Amon. I have been learning magic since I was very young, but I am still only a 2nd-level mage. You said that you are from Babylon City, the capital of the kingdom of Babylon. Why are you in the mountains of Hittite?" Since he had already exposed his mastery of magic in a moment of desperation, he might as well go with the flow and pretend to be a mage from Egypt. After all, it was impossible for Metatro to verify his identity. Madanzo asked, "Hittite? This is the territory of Babylon. I might have made a mistake. There are no obvious landmarks here in the first place. To tell you the truth, my great-grandfather was also a mage, but he died here in the war a long time ago. I am here to find his relics. Dear mage, why did you come to such a dangerous and remote place?" Amon thought of something inexplicably. He was stunned for a moment before he replied, "My intention is similar to yours. A high priest lost something here many years ago. He ordered me to find it and told me that this is also a kind of training." Madanzo blurted out, "Did you offend him? Why did he send such a young mage here?" Then he explained, "I didn't mean to offend you. I was just saying." Amon didn't mind at all. He waved his hand and said, "This is indeed a kind of punishment. I did something wrong, so I am willing to accept this kind of punishment." Madanzo smiled and said, "It's impossible for an ordinary high priest to travel through the mountains and come here. He must have left something behind when he was flying in the air. If it's nearby, I can find someone to help." Amon was surprised. Find someone to help? Who could he find here? Aren't you also here to look for your ancestors' ruins? Madanzo explained again, "I've been here several times and got to know the largest dwarf tribe nearby. They should be the ones who are most familiar with this area. You can ask them to help you find the thing you lost in the mountains. Amon asked, Caveman. You have dealings with their tribe. What's going on today? Why did you go to the pool and disturb those ironbacks? I've never seen that kind of mutated ironbacks. Madanzo replied with some embarrassment, although I didn't find the ancestors' ruins, I became familiar with the dwarf tribe here and often traded with them. This tribe doesn't have many good things, but they can smelt refined iron embryos, which are very valuable. I also need money to travel deep into the mountains these years, so I traded with them. This place may still be in Babylon, so it's not smuggling, is it? Refined iron was officially controlled in every country. Such a private transaction was more or less illegal. But Amon was too lazy to care about this kind of business. He asked casually, Are you looking for ore? Do you want to smelt refined iron yourself? Madanzo was stunned. Isn't this your first time here? How do you know that there is the best refined iron sand here? Amon shrugged and said, It's my first time here, but I've known for a long time that the best refined iron sand can be found in the excrement of the ironbacks. Madanzo was stunned, and his expression became very strange in the light of the fire. He cursed in a low voice and said, The so-called best raw material of Damasang ore is actually the excrement of the ironbacks. That damn chief didn't tell me that. Amon was also stunned. Ah, so you didn't know. Then how did they tell you? Madanzo said bitterly, The tribe here produces the best refined iron embryos, which are much better than ordinary refined iron. In our place, it's called Damasang. A small piece of it can be taken out of the mountains and you can make a lot of money, but the production is very small. I asked the chief if we could get more. The chief said that the ore was difficult to mine, and said that there was a pool in the mountains with silt that was rich in the best Damasang ore. But there was an ironback king living in the pool, and it was very dangerous to mine, so their people didn't dare to come. I thought that as an intermediate warrior, it should be no problem to deal with an ironback king, so I came quietly. I wanted to kill the ironback king and let the dwarves see my power. The chief didn't tell me that there were 4, and he didn't tell me that the ore was the excrement of the ironbacks. As a result, I almost lost my life here. Fortunately, I met you. Amon looked at him and couldn't help but laugh. The laughter grew louder and louder, and then Madanzo also laughed. The two laughed at each other, and waves of echoes came from the mountains at night. Schrödinger, who was dozing off, raised his head and looked at the two with dissatisfaction. His expression seemed to say, What's so funny? Isn't it embarrassing? After the sun rose the next day, Amon leaned on a branch and carried Schrödinger on his back. Under the guidance of Madanzo, he continued to walk to higher ground. Although he didn't intend to let the caveman help him find Bear, it was always useful to find out if there were any noteworthy places in the vicinity. The clouds on the high mountains looked like a floating sea from afar, but when you walked closer, it was like a misty fog. Amon had almost passed through the clouds for the 3rd time. Halfway through, he suddenly heard something in front of him. He stopped with his staff and said, Madanzo, there seems to be a sound in front of us. It doesn't sound like an animal, it's more like human footsteps. Madanzo jumped onto a big rock and looked forward with his sword in hand. After a while, he suddenly shouted, Link, you old bastard, come here quickly. You lied to me so badly, see how I'll deal with you. A group of people came out from the woods at the bend of the mountain road. The leader was the old bastard that Madanzo scolded. He didn't look very old, probably only about 30 years old. His skin was slightly darker, but it was the fairest among the people. He was wearing clothes made of animal skin and a pair of straw shoes. He was the only one who wore shoes among the group. He was also the chief of the caveman tribe. As soon as Link saw Madanzo, he hurried forward and said, You've wronged me. I heard that you went to the cold pool where the king of Ironbacks lived to mine sand. I couldn't find you when it was dark, so I gathered the warriors of the tribe to save you when the sun rose. Behind Link, there were more than 30 warriors. Some of them were holding simple bows and arrows, some were holding spears with wooden handles tied to iron heads, and some were holding very interesting weapons. They were slender and rough flat iron bars, sharpened on one side, which could be used to stab or cut, but they were not made into the shape of knives. These people were not too short, but the chief Link said that they were the strongest warriors of the tribe. They should be the tallest, but they were about the average height of an ordinary adult. It seemed that the cavemen were called dwarfs for a reason. As soon as Madanzo saw Link, he jumped down from the rock and pretended to knock his head with the ridge of his sword. By the time you came to save me, I would have been eaten by the ironbacks. Didn't you say there was a king of ironbacks? Why did I meet 4 of them? Ah! Link exclaimed. His mouth was wide open, and he blocked with a short stick in his hand. His short stick was made of some beast's bone, and there was even a parangan inlaid on it. It looked very much like a mage's staff. He looked up and down at Madanzo. You can come back safely. Yesterday, you sneaked away alone before we finished talking. I told you again and again not to go without me. What you met was not the king of the ironbacks, but the big ones guarding the king's lair. The king of the ironbacks usually only comes out after midnight. 4 big ironbacks. Are you all right? Madanzo took out a yellow-black, 5-inch-long hook-like thing from his pocket. It was the trophy he got yesterday, the beast's claw that he cut off with his sword. He showed it off and said, "Look at this. Fortunately, a noble mage helped me, and I cut off this claw with my own hands." The crowd gasped. Link looked enviously at the claw in Madanzo's hand and asked curiously, "Mage? What mage? Is he your friend?" Madanzo replied proudly, "He's not only my friend, but also my savior." You ignorant old man. You haven't even heard of a mage, have you? He's much better than you. Amon came out from behind the big rock. These cavemen had never even heard of a mage, so he didn't have to introduce himself. They just thought of him as a friend of Madanzo and a guest of the tribe. They were welcomed to the mountain together with Madanzo. This tribe really had the characteristics of cavemen. It was built on a flat slope under a low stone wall. There were many natural caves along the stone wall, which were artificially excavated for habitation. A fire was lit in the largest cave. Some people took turns to fetch firewood every day to keep the fire burning. It was a common fire source for all the families in the tribe. Although the dwarves here already knew how to make fire with flint, the fire was also a symbol of the whole tribe. The big cave burning with fire was equivalent to a shrine in a general town, and the open space in front of the cave was also a place for the whole tribe to gather. There were also houses on the hillside not far from the stone wall. They were built with wood and thatch, and the walls were smeared with mud. They were simple but strong. Those who lived in the houses were people of high status in the tribe. Madanzo seemed to be very respected here, so there was a house for him to live in. Amon also lived in this thatched hut. At dusk, there was a gathering in the tribe. A group of people were jumping around a pile of firewood in an open space. They were passing the beast claw that Matatro had chopped off to each other, imitating all kinds of chopping movements, as if they were the ones who chopped off the beast claw. They looked very intoxicated. Amon and Madanzo, who worked together to fight the ironback, sat in the most distinguished position, right in front of the big cave burning with the fire, together with the chief Link. Madanzo whispered in Amon's ear, "This is the happiest time of the day. They will dance until the fire goes out before going back to sleep." Amon also whispered, "What are they doing with the claw? They look like they are drunk." Madanzo said, "It's a ritual. They fantasize about gaining the power to kill the beast, to give them confidence and courage, to not be afraid when hunting, and to succeed every time. Anyway, it's a kind of witchcraft prayer." It was getting dark while they were talking. A dwarf took a branch to the big cave to get a fire, and it seemed that he was going to light the firewood in the open space. Amon suddenly remembered something mentioned in the message left by Crazy Ol. He stood up with the branch in one hand and pointed at the firewood in the distance with the other hand. A wind swirled around the firewood, and a light appeared in the wind. The light turned into threads of fire, and the threads of fire turned into tongues of dancing flames in the wind. The flames ignited the firewood. Although it was the simplest fire-summoning magic, the effect was both magical and dazzling when it was performed with air magic. The dwarves who were dancing around the fire stopped, and the others who were sitting in a circle also stood up. Then Aman saw all of them prostrate to him, their faces full of reverence and fear. Link also saluted him, and Aman clearly heard him say, "O messenger of the gods, you bring warmth and light." Medanzo also stood up and bowed to Aman, but he quietly winked and whispered, "You are so good, it's so beautiful. Unfortunately, I am not a mage, or I would have done it long ago." Chapter 28. Aman received the highest standard of treatment in the cavemen tribe. He lived alone in the largest and tallest thatched hut in the village. Even Schrödinger had a soft grass nest with a leather mattress. That night, when Aman was resting, the chief of the tribe, Link, and Aman's new friend, Medanzo, did not sleep. The two were discussing something in private in the big cave with a bonfire. "Link, brother, since you came, I have been treating you well and telling my people that you are a friend of the gods. If you are in danger, I will immediately gather the warriors of the tribe to save you." Medanzo waved his hand. Stop, don't mention this, you make me angry. Just tell me what you want. Is there something you want from me again?" Link's request was a little shy. He leaned over and whispered, "I promised to exchange all the damask steel produced by the tribe with you, and I also sent my people to look for the ancestral ruins that you mentioned. You promised me that after you found the ancestral ruins, you will obtain the power of the gods with me, but several years have passed. I am afraid you know that it will be difficult to find it. You have taken away the best iron billets in our tribe, but what you promised to exchange?" Medanzo interrupted him again. "Link, do you want to settle accounts with me? I've given you a lot of benefits. Whatever I owe your tribe, I'll bring it with me next time. When did I go back on my word?" Link hurriedly shook his head and said, No, I don't mean that. You are looking for the ancestral ruins to master the power given by the gods, right? And your friend, obviously knows how to do it. Why don't you ask him to teach you? If he agrees to teach you, help me ask him too. We have already agreed to learn together." Medanzo was embarrassed to say that he met Aman by chance on the road and that Aman had only saved his life, but he did not want to lose face in front of Link, so he had to prevaricate, "Of course there is no problem with Aman teaching me, we have a friendship of life and death." "But why should he teach you?" Link said shamelessly, "I'm begging you. We've been through life and death together. If you agree to this, in the future, our tribe." He stopped here, implying that there would be plenty of benefits, and at the same time, hinted that Medanzo still owed the tribe something in exchange. Medanzo was a little embarrassed. He knew that in the outside world, magic could not be learned at will. Only nobles with the permission of the shrine were qualified to learn magic. No mage would teach magic to a barbarian chief. Doing so would be a violation of the oath made in the temple, and would also be severely punished. Just as he was worrying, he suddenly remembered the purpose of Aman's visit and said, "Let me tell you, Aman is here to find something. It is said that the gods lost it here. If you can send your people to help him find it, maybe I can ask him to teach you how to master the power bestowed by the gods." Link's face lit up with joy. "What is the messenger of the gods looking for?" "I'm not too sure either, but I can help you pass on a message. Tell him what you think, and then you can ask Aman yourself," Metatro said evasively. Link hurriedly stood up and said, "Then what are you waiting for?" Medanzo also stood up and spread out his hands. "It's the middle of the night. You can't let me disturb him empty-handed, can you?" Link nodded repeatedly, "I understand. There's still wine in the tribe. I'll send someone to get it right away." Metatro patted him on the shoulder. "As the chief, where did you hide the wine?" "I'll go get it with you." Walking to the entrance of the cave, Medanzo asked again, seemingly intentionally or unintentionally, "Do you really think that Amon is the messenger of the gods?" Link's expression was a little cunning. "Didn't you say that he's a mage? I guess the ancestor you're looking for is also a mage, right? Now I understand what mage means. Since the people here regard him as the messenger of the gods, then he is the messenger of the gods, isn't he?" After thinking for a moment, he added with a very serious expression, "This messenger of the gods has indeed mastered the power bestowed by the gods, there is no doubt about that. You still don't know what kind of god he believes in." Medanzo curled his lips. "There's no doubt about that." Link pointed behind him. "It's better than a bonfire, isn't it?" Medanzo was amused. "You can only say this to me, not to the people." Amon sat quietly in his room, meditating. He raised his hand and suddenly a bright light appeared in front of him. The light turned into a tongue of flame in the void. This was the fire element magic he had just begun to practice. Unlike the water element magic he first learned, he was soon able to directly summon a flame without the help of a staff. If other second-level mages had seen Amon's skill, they would have been so surprised that their jaws would have dropped. Amon's staff was very powerful. It made a big difference whether he used it or not. It was Amon's habit to master and familiarize himself with magic in the fastest way, and then practice and experience it in the most difficult way. The flames that he summoned out of the void were quite fun. They looked like little dancing figures, but Amon didn't dare to casually control the flames, for fear of burning down the houses of the people around him. He looked at the flame and thought about something. This tribe was located in a very high position. If he remembered correctly, he had already passed through 3 layers of clouds around the mountainside. This was the place where Crazy Ol said he could stay. He needed to practice low-level magic on such a high mountain and pay attention to the sky in the east. Amon was worried about where to stay. He didn't have much food with him. He didn't expect to meet such a tribe. With good food, good drinks, and good hospitality, it was the best place to stay and practice magic. He didn't need to go hunting and find a place to stay. Thanks to Crazy Ol's reminder, Amon decided to play magic in front of the bonfire with this idea in mind. At this moment, Medanzo's voice came from outside the house. "Dear mage, have you rested? I'm Metatro. I'm here to bring you good wine and delicious roast meat for your cat." Schrödinger jumped out of the grass. Amon flicked out the flame and shouted, "I haven't rested yet. Come in." Medanzo opened the door and walked in, followed by 2 petite female dwarves. One was holding a clay pot, the other was holding a wooden plate covered with flakes of shale. On the hot rocks, the meat was sizzling with oil. The dwarves put down the food and left. Medanzo put 2 stone cups on the wooden plank. One was empty, the other was filled with animal fat and lit with a straw. This was the oldest candle and the most luxurious lighting tool in the tribe. Amon was stunned. "You want to drink with me in the middle of the night?" Medanzo shook his head. "No, no, no. I'm here to offer wine to the messenger of the gods on behalf of the people here." He poured a cup of wine from the clay pot and put it in front of Amon respectfully. Amon sniffed and knew that the wine was not very good. Although he didn't drink often, his father was an alcoholic. The wine transported to Duk by merchants was always good wine. Amon could tell the quality of the wine by its smell alone, but it was not easy to drink wine in this tribe of cavemen in the mountains. Amon stretched out his hand. "Thank you. Sit down and drink with us." Medanzo hurriedly waved his hand. "Dear mage, I should call you my lord outside the mountains. How can I drink with you?" Amon laughed. "We are in the dwarves' tribe. How can I let you watch me drink alone in the middle of the night when you bring me wine and meat?" Medanzo nodded. "Then I'll drink with you." He ran to the door and shouted, "Bring another cup." It seemed that he wanted to drink too. Otherwise, he wouldn't have said, "I'm sorry, but no." Amon asked him to sit down and drink. Medanzo was secretly delighted, thinking that his plan might succeed. This mage was very young, only a teenager. He didn't have the arrogant attitude of the elders in the shrines. He was easygoing and easy to talk to. It seemed that his status was not very high. On the other hand, it was clear that such a mage was sent to this place as a punishment and exile. His family must have lost power and offended some high priest, so he found a reason to expel him from the shrine and let him fend for himself. How could he find something in this mountain? Where was he supposed to find it? If that was the case, his plan might actually succeed. Link wanted to learn magic, but Madanzo wanted to learn magic even more. Otherwise, he wouldn't have risked his life to go deep into the jungle to find the ruins of his ancestors. Under normal circumstances, a mage would not teach him magic without permission. But in this place, Amon's appearance seemed to be negotiable. The two drank and chatted. Madanzo intentionally or unintentionally talked about his own experience. His great-grandfather was a priest of the Marduk shrine in Babylon City, a 6th-level mage who was only one step away from becoming a supreme mage. Unfortunately, he was injured in a war and escaped the battlefield with a precious magic scroll of flight. Madanzo's great-grandfather died in the deep jungle near the Euphrates Valley, possibly because of the exhaustion of the scroll or the severe injury. After his disappearance, his family almost went bankrupt and owed a huge debt. At this time, a stranger from afar saved Madanzo's great-grandmother and grandfather. It was a hunter from Assyria who happened to find the remains of Madanzo's great-grandfather, his belongings, and his will while hunting in the Euphrates Valley. The hunter buried his great-grandfather according to the contents of the will and sent the remains to Babylon City. The remains were very valuable. The staff inlaid with 2 parangons was enough to pay off the debt. Later, although the orphan and the widow managed to save the territory of the family, they offended a very noble lord in the area. Amon's grandfather lost the right to inherit the position of priest. The reason was that he was not suitable to learn magic and did not awaken the power bestowed by the gods in the ceremony. This was a complete excuse. It was obvious that someone was not a mage but still enjoyed the status of a priest in name. Anyway, it was not easy for the orphan and the widow to live. Needless to say, this was a declining noble family. It was almost forgotten in Babylon City. When it came to Metatro's generation, they even lost their noble status and were just ordinary commoners. When people talked about the past, they even laughed at his grandfather for being so useless that his descendants fell into such a state. The hunter also passed on the last words of Amon's great-grandfather. It was said that the 6th-level mage did not die on the spot after falling into the deep valley. In his pain, he prayed to Marduk for 7 days and 7 nights. Finally, in despair, he recorded all the magic he had learned in a cave, hoping that someone would find his body and bury him, and then send his belongings back to his hometown. Later, the hunter fulfilled his wish. As Madanzo spoke, he carefully observed Amon's expression, because this was an offense against the gods. His great-grandfather's behavior also violated the instructions of the shrine. However, Amon did not get angry, nor did he scold him. He looked solemn and listened very seriously. Only then did Madanzo carefully continue. When Madanzo was a child, he heard the legend of his great-grandfather from his grandfather. It was a family secret that could not be mentioned to outsiders. When he grew up, he lost the qualification to learn magic, so he began to learn body arts. At the age of 20, he became a 4th-level warrior. But he never gave up. His life's wish and dream was to learn magic. This was impossible in Babylon City. No one would teach him. With his status, practicing magic was against the law, and the teacher would be punished. Metatro recalled the story of his great-grandfather. Was the content of the magic written in the cave where his great-grandfather died still there? If he could find that place, he might be able to practice magic on his own. With a fluke, the young Madanzo went deep into the valley between Babylon and Hittite, trying to find the remains of his ancestor. But he did not have a detailed map. He only knew the general area, which was almost impossible to find. But in the mountains, he became acquainted with a dwarf tribe. Speaking of this, Madanzo explained nervously, Dear mage, I see you as a friend and my savior. That's why I'm telling you such a secret. I don't want to become a sorcerer. My ancestor was a mage. According to the law, I should have inherited his position. But he sacrificed his life for the country and was ridiculed as a deserter. His descendants were also treated unfairly. My only goal is to restore the glory of my ancestor and prove that I am qualified to inherit it. He waited for a long time but did not hear any reply from Amon. He looked up anxiously and was stunned. After a while, he suddenly came to his senses. He hurriedly stood up, stepped back, and knelt down. Oh my God, how can there be such a coincidence in the world? You're holding Mr. Nietzsche's keepsake. In the candlelight, Amon was holding a small golden plate. There were emblems on both sides, engraved in cursive script and blade script respectively. It looked like a seal or a nameplate of a shrine. When Madanzo told his family history, Amon had confirmed Madanzo's identity. He was the descendant of the deceased mage that Crazy Ol found in the Euphrates Valley more than 100 years ago. When the deceased mage's widow sent Nietzsche away, she made a gold plate for Nietzsche and told him that if he needed help in the future, he could send someone to find his family with this plate. This plate later became Nietzsche's keepsake. Crazy Ol traveled the continent with it and gave it to Amon the night before Amon left. He asked Amon to keep it carefully as it might be useful in the future. More than 100 years had passed. Amon was not sure if Madanzo still recognized this keepsake or if the widow's words had been passed down. So he took out the plate tentatively. If Madanzo did not recognize it, he would not mention it again. Unexpectedly, Madanzo recognized it at a glance. Amon stood up and said, I'm not mistaken. You know Mr. Nietzsche's name, but why are you kneeling when talking? Madanzo answered, this is the legacy of our family. Mr. Nietzsche is the benefactor who saved our family. It was he who selflessly sent the precious relic of our ancestors back to Babylon City. Seeing this keepsake is equivalent to seeing Mr. Nietzsche. We must greet him and do our best to help him. I've known the emblem on this keepsake since I was a child. I've even dreamed of meeting Mr. Nietzsche or his descendants. This was the truth. Madanzo knew that Nietzsche was a sorcerer who practiced magic privately. The magic he learned came from his great-grandfather's legacy. If he met Nietzsche, he might learn the magic left by his ancestors. This was one of Madanzo's childhood fantasies. That was why he remembered the emblem on this keepsake so clearly. Amon said, you didn't tell me the whole truth. Mr. Nietzsche was a sorcerer, but you only said he was a hunter. Madanzo hurriedly explained, yes. You also know that a sorcerer's identity cannot be made public, so I dare not reveal it in front of a noble mage like you. Mr. Amon, why do you have Mr. Nietzsche's keepsake? Keepsake? Madanzo took it for granted that Nietzsche was no longer alive. After all, it was more than 100 years ago. The Amon in front of him was either his descendant or his successor. Otherwise, it was impossible for him to take out this token when he was telling the story. He never mentioned Nietzsche's name. This is indeed Mr. Nietzsche's keepsake. He gave it to me personally. It's such a coincidence that we can meet here. But if you think about it carefully, there's a reason. You came to this area in search of your ancestors' relics, and I met you here. Let's continue drinking. There must be a reason why you suddenly told me these secrets of your family, right? Amon walked over and pulled Madanzo up. Then they returned to the simple wooden table and sat down. Madanzo's face was flushed with excitement. He clenched the stone glass with both hands, leaned forward and said, Mr. Nietzsche gave you the keepsake himself? So he's still alive. Then he must have been a great sorcerer. Can I see Mr. Nietzsche? Can you take me to see him? He asked a series of questions. He was so excited that he was a little incoherent. Amon waved his hand and said, Madanzo, don't get too excited. I'm afraid I can't take you to see Mr. Nietzsche, and I can't tell you where he is. Your family's teachings don't include this, right? You haven't answered my question just now. Why did you suddenly talk to me about the secret of your family tonight? Madanzo finally came to his senses. He remembered that his family's teachings were only to try their best to help the person who held the keepsake, and not to make all kinds of requests as soon as they met. He took a deep breath and finally said, in fact, the reason why I want to learn magic from you and meet Mr. Nietzsche is also to learn magic. Mr. Amon, may I ask if you are also a... Amon interrupted him and said, you want to ask me if I'm also a sorcerer? Mr. Nietzsche was a sorcerer, but it doesn't mean that he will always be a sorcerer. It's not difficult for a great sorcerer to become a mage. Don't forget that more than 100 years have passed. He did not say whether he was a sorcerer or not, and vaguely avoided the question. Chapter 29. Madanzo was smart enough not to ask further. Since Amon had already said that he was a mage, then he would take him as a mage. Anyway, the identity of a sorcerer was not suitable for public discussion. He poured a few more glasses of wine for Amon in succession and waited eagerly for an answer. The wine of the dwarves was made from wild fruits collected in the mountains. It tasted a little sour and looked very cloudy, but when tasted carefully, there was a very special sweetness to it, a taste that other wines did not have. When Amon was almost done drinking, he asked, Madanzo, your great-grandfather was a priest of the shrine of Marduk, but his dying will violated the oracle of the shrine. What do you think? Madanzo thought very carefully before replying. He received the power bestowed by the god in the shrine and was able to practice magic and become a 6th-level mage. The oath in the shrine and the hard practice were his efforts, and he also obtained achievements and enjoyment far beyond that of ordinary people. If a god like Marduk really exists, he does not owe him anything, he has already gotten what he deserves. Amon's expression was very focused, and he asked thoughtfully, who said this? Madanzo, my grandfather told me, this is what my great-grandmother said to comfort my grandfather when he was dissatisfied. She also said that if the god Marduk saved my great-grandfather, he should be particularly grateful, and if not, people should face what they have experienced, this is normal. Amon nodded and said, your great-grandmother is indeed a person worthy of respect. It is indeed a bit unfair that your grandfather lost the right to inherit the position of priest, but your great-grandfather's experience has nothing to do with Marduk, if there is such a god Marduk. Practicing magic privately is against the law. What do you think about this issue? Amon was himself a sorcerer, and he really wanted to know what Madanzo, who also wanted to practice magic privately, thought about this issue. Madanzo smiled and lowered his voice. You also saw those big ironbacks when you saved me. They are born with a kind of power similar to magic, maybe it was given by the gods, but did they get permission from the shrine? Amon also smiled. Mr. Nietzsche first learned magic from your ancestors' will, so he should be grateful. His gratitude is my gratitude. It's not that I can't teach you magic, but you're already an advanced warrior, and the first thing you awaken is the power in your blood. You know very well that magic and body arts can't be practiced at the same level. As soon as Madanzo heard Amon's words, he immediately stood up and saluted again. Of course I know this, but I am already an advanced warrior, and in theory I can perform another power awakening ritual. Maybe I can awaken the power given by the gods, even if it is just to learn some simple low-level magic. When I become a high-level supreme warrior in the future, I can. Amon interrupted him. Let's talk about the future in the future. I want to use a special method to awaken your power, which may be more troublesome for an advanced warrior. If it really succeeds, you may have to go through all kinds of tests again, and your body arts will not be able to continue to advance for a long time. Madanzo replied simply, as long as you can teach me magic, everything is negotiable. Madanzo came to beg Amon. It could be said that he was begging the wrong person, but it was also asking the right person. In short, they were a pair of muddle-headed fools. In the shrines of the various kingdoms on the continent, only a mage of at least the 5th level or above could hold a ceremony to awaken the power of a person, and only a supreme mage could hold a second ceremony to awaken the power of an advanced or high-ranking warrior. As for the power Gabriel awakened for Maria, that was a special case. Maria was a candidate for the adoratress, and she also had the god's tear. Gabriel, as a supreme warrior, had mastered advanced magic. It was almost impossible for this to happen to others. There had never been a case of a second-level mage performing a second power awakening for a fourth-level warrior. Amon didn't know this. Crazy Ol didn't tell him, and Madanzo, who was not qualified to learn magic, didn't know about it either. But Amon wasn't thinking about the kind of ritual in the shrines. He didn't understand it either. He was just thinking about how to awaken the power of two sides for Madanzo. Thinking of this, he said in a low voice, "I can try my way, but I can't guarantee success. After all, there are very few people who can awaken the power of the gods. Wait for me for a few days. I'll come to you when I think about it." Madanzo was overjoyed. He nodded repeatedly and said, "As long as you're willing to try, I'll be grateful. If it really doesn't work, it only proves that I'm not that lucky, and I'll give up." Crazy Ol had told Amon that he might as well try the method he knew or was still guessing on others. Normally, Amon wouldn't experiment on anyone. But since Madanzo came to him voluntarily, it would be a waste not to try. Amon didn't expect that after the first test subject, there would soon be a second one. After saying this, Madanzo didn't leave. He smiled awkwardly and said shamelessly, "Dear mage, the dwarves here worship you as the messenger of the gods. The chief, Link, told me that he is willing to help you in any way possible. Since you promised to teach me magic, Link also wants to learn. What do you want to teach him?" Madanzo was smart. He didn't ask, "Can I do it?" but, "What do I need to do?" Amon thought for a moment and answered, "I can also try, but I need to talk to him." "Call him in." Link was waiting outside the door. Madanzo called him and immediately came in happily. At this time, the jar of wine was finished, and the plate of meat was gone without anyone noticing. Amon didn't know how Schrödinger ate, but he wasn't afraid of the hot stones burning his claws. Amon let Madanzo go back to rest and left Link alone. They talked about the situation in the tribe, and vaguely found that this tribe and this chief might have some fate with him. This was a large tribe with hundreds of people. They occupied the plateau alone, enjoying the most luxuriant forest and hunting grounds with the most game. Other tribes couldn't compete with them. One of the most important reasons was that this tribe knew how to smelt iron. There were several furnaces in the caves on the mountain wall. The smelting skill was passed down from generation to generation. It was said that Link's grandfather's grandfather's grandfather learned it from outside the mountains. Link's grandfather's grandfather's grandfather was once captured in a tribal war, and then sold to a large town far away from the mountains as a slave. His main job was to open mines, mine, and smelt. The conditions were very difficult. He stayed in the town for 20 years and learned a lot. He even became a small foreman in the mine and managed other slaves. Finally, he found an opportunity to escape and escaped back to the mountains with 7 or 8 cavemen. This tribe's smelting skill was passed down from that time. But there was only language in the tribe, no written language. Even the chief was illiterate, so there were no detailed records. Speaking of this, Link asked worriedly, "Can the messenger of the gods learn magic even if he can't read?" If it was outside the temple, of course, the answer was no. But Amon thought for a moment and answered, "You can learn it, but it's a lot more troublesome. You'd better learn how to read in the future." Hearing this, Link was so happy that he almost jumped up, but he quickly prostrated on the ground and said, "So you agree?" "Thank you, messenger of the gods. If you have any orders, I'm willing to gather the whole tribe to serve you. If my people ask me which god gave me power, I will definitely answer that it was God Amon." Amon gave him a fright. Crazy Ol had asked him to solve the secret of the gods, but this dwarf chief gave him the hat of Ammonius as soon as he opened his mouth. Amon waved his hand and said, "You don't have to do this. I can't guarantee success. It's up to you. Since I've promised Madanzo, I might as well promise you." But I feel that you know some magic. Is that a mage's staff in your hand? Link raised the beast bone inlaid with God's stones and said, "This is the chief's scepter. I know a little of the divine spell you mentioned. It's passed down from generation to generation. Only those who have mastered it are qualified to be the chief." Link did know a few simple divine spells. They were earth elemental divine spells, but they were only the most basic and simple applications. He didn't even know what earth magic was, let alone learn all of it. There were no written records in the tribe, so he certainly didn't know its specific origin. In this way, Amon settled down in the tribe of the cavemen. As the emissary of the gods, he was treated like a god here. He also taught 2 students. Amon pondered for a few days before he took Madanzo and Link to a secluded place and had a private talk. "No matter what you've learned before, I want to start from the first ceremony, especially you, Madanzo. Don't think too much about the power you're awakening. Don't think about whether it's the power given by the gods or the power sleeping in your blood. Don't think that this is the second awakening ceremony. Just start from the beginning. When the power is awakened, the desire will also be awakened. It's not clear whether the desire comes from the body or the soul. It's 2 sides of the same coin. You have to learn how to face it and not be controlled by it. The first thing you have to learn is how to put your spirit in a state of concentration and introspect your body and mind. Pray to the Taraculus, I will give it to you too temporarily. Each of you can use it in turn for a day. Link, remember, you have to exercise your body like the warriors in the tribe, or simply learn physical skills from Madanzo. And Madanzo, you have to forget what magic is and what physical skills are. You're awakening a kind of power, but you don't know which god gave it. This kind of prayer may be difficult, but you have to reach that state of concentration and introspect. Link was very obedient. It's not difficult, it's harmonious. Chapter 30. To Amon's surprise, he tried his best to follow Crazy Ol's method and succeeded. What was even more surprising was that the first person to awaken the power of 2 sides was Link. By the time Link had almost mastered all the elementary earth magic, all he needed to do was to master the skills and use them in coordination with each other. But Madanzo's power had not been awakened yet. Amon carefully analyzed and felt that it was not because Madanzo's aptitude was inferior to Link's, but because he had an inherent impression of magic. It was not easy to eliminate those prejudices in his mind and focus on awakening the power of 2 sides. Some things could not be forgotten just because one forgot them. Link was very interesting. He did not know what magic and body arts were before, so he was directly used as a test subject by Amon. He only knew a little bit of earth magic, which meant that he had not yet crossed the threshold of the ritual, but his accumulation was quite sufficient. Amon did not know what to teach him first, so he simply taught Link the mining skills of Duk. Link already knew a little, so he naturally understood it. Then the ritual to awaken the power was a piece of cake. After that, it would be easy to teach Link. He would start from the earth elemental magic that he was already familiar with. Link had practiced blindly for so many years, and he did not lack mana. Amon mastered all the elementary earth magic, and Link was soon able to wave his bone stick and perform all kinds of elementary earth magic. Amon then taught him the simplest healing magic. He could not wear the hat of Ammonius for nothing. Healing magic was the most useful in such a tribe. Seeing that Link was almost at the level of a first-level mage, Amon told him, in order to better master the magic or to use it in a critical moment, you can use a staff. But try not to use it when practicing magic or practicing the combination of various magic. That was what Crazy Ol had told Amon, and Amon had told Link the same thing. But he had forgotten one thing. Link's bone stick was inlaid with a common parangan, which was far inferior to Amon's staff. So there was no need to remind him. Amon was far more mature than the average child. He was absolutely calm, but he was still a teenager. What he taught Link and Madanzo was a bit childish in the eyes of outsiders. Link's success was more or less a fluke, and Metatros was also a fluke. Medanzo had some doubts at first. After all, it was hard to get rid of years of prejudice. But when he saw Link brandishing the bone stick and performing all kinds of earth magic, he was completely convinced by Amon. Without a trace of hesitation, he wholeheartedly followed Amon's instructions and used the Taroculus to awaken the power. About 10 days later, he also succeeded. Medanzo and Link did not know that before Amon met them, he had only practiced water and air magic, and had just started practicing fire magic. The process of Amon teaching them was also the process of his own practice. But Amon found that he learned the same kind of magic, such as earth magic, much faster than Link, so much so that Link did not even realize that Amon was practicing and teaching him at the same time. It was only in the environment of the barbarians that Amon was able to deceive them so successfully. If it were outside, an experienced mage would be able to see through Amon's disguise at a glance. Seeing that both of them had awakened their power, Amon took back the Taroculus and taught them several kinds of low-level magic, letting them practice by themselves. He also made some requirements, such as silently condensing a layer of ice on the ground and so on. Amon just said it casually based on his own experience, but it was hard for the two guys. How could it be so easy? It was a special trial for Amon by an 8th-level mage. The teacher himself was still ignorant, and the students were more likely to get into trouble. One day, when Link was learning fire element magic, he burned his own house, and burned it very thoroughly. Amon quickly taught him water element magic, the purpose of which was to put out the fire if anything happened. While awakening the power of two sides, it also awakened the desire of two sides. There was no cold spring here to bathe in, so Amon simply told them to practice their spirit every day, to focus on introspection, to quietly experience the restlessness, but not to be controlled by it. If they really had no place to vent their energy, they could go hunting in the mountains. The clansmen were surprised to find that the honorable chief seemed to have changed into a different person these days. He had actually become the bravest warrior, personally leading the strong men of the clan to hunt in the mountains. Moreover, the prey they hunted was the most, causing people to exclaim in admiration. It seemed that after the arrival of the messenger of the gods, even the chief was moved by the power of the gods, and had to sacrifice the prey he hunted with his own hands to the gods. As for Medanzo, he was particularly impulsive and irritated during this time. He always wanted to find someone to fight with, but no one in the tribe could beat him, so he always looked for Link to fight. Medanzo was, after all, an intermediate warrior. With the help of his staff, Link could use some of the earth element magic, such as slow, trapping, earth shield, etc., which he was best at. Once Medanzo got close to him, he would end up with a bloody nose and a swollen face. After a few times, Link gave up and let Medanzo play by himself. Later, Medanzo and Link discussed something. Link, who was feeling itchy, was also tempted, so they came to find Amon together. When was a person the most impulsive and bold, feeling that he was not afraid of anything and dared to go into any trouble? It was the current situation of Link and Medanzo. They had just mastered unprecedented power, and they had nowhere to vent their restless energy. Medanzo remembered the last time he was in danger by the pool. He felt very unwilling and wanted to take Link there again. Last time, he could resist 3 big ironbacks by himself. It was said that the king of the ironbacks was equivalent to a few big ironbacks. Now that he had learned magic, and with the help of Link who also knew magic, he should be able to take care of them all. When he was a child, he had heard the stories of heroes in myths and legends who challenged all kinds of monsters. Now that he was in a mood, he also wanted to imitate the heroes in the stories. Link was more stable. Although he also wanted to go, he was afraid that something would happen. After a discussion, the two felt that it would be foolproof to ask their teacher Amon to go. So they urged Amon to go together. Amon listened to the idea of the two students, frowned and asked, "What do you want to do?" "Wash manure." Link replied, "It's just a trial. There are no other opponents in this mountain." Medanzo added, you can also go mine sand. Clean up that place and let the people in the tribe go to mine the damask ore and refine it into billets. A small piece outside is worth a lot of money. Amon asked in return, beside the pool where the king of the ironbacks lives, the deposits must be the best fine iron or raw material, but if you kill all those ironbacks, won't there be no ore to mine in the future? Madanzo shook his head and said, who said we were going to kill the ironbacks? We are just going to practice. If we have the ability to drive the ironbacks aside, we will go back with our people to dig in the mud, so that we can mine more ore in the future. At the end of the day, Amon was actually persuaded. It was the nature of young people to like new adventures. Amon's character was calm, largely because of the environment he lived in, but he was also very playful when he could. Amon was already an excellent second-level mage and a second-level warrior, but so far he had not tested his skills and wanted to know how good they were. Moreover, Amon had his own troubles recently. Although he was busy teaching his two students, his second-level magic and second-level body arts had reached the most proficient level, but there was no sign of further advancement. According to Crazy Ole's speculation, if he did not go the wrong way, the next thing he would face was the test of firmness of faith, so that he could become a third-level mage and third-level warrior at the same time. But what exactly was this test about? How would it come? Amon didn't have a clue. The test was firmness of faith, and he did not even know which god he should believe in. How could he pass such a test? In addition, Crazy Ole asked him to pay attention to the eastern sky and wait for the rolling thunder, saying that he would only see the next message when the disaster came. Amon did not notice anything unusual in the eastern sky for so many days. He was waiting for the disaster in the prophecy. But since it was a disaster, he did not want it to happen, so he was in a complicated and contradictory mood. He was inexplicably irritated and could not settle down. Since his two students had come up with the idea of playing, he might as well relax and try his strength at the same time. Amon was cautious and asked Link about the ironbacks. There were only 4 big ironbacks in the pool. The king of the ironbacks usually did not come out during the day, and even if it did, it was only as powerful as the 4 ironbacks put together. He secretly calculated in his mind that the 3 of them together were enough to deal with the king, so he nodded. Link volunteered to lend his staff to Amon. Neither he nor Madanzo knew that the fine iron branch in Amon's hand was a staff. Even a supreme mage could not see it, let alone their eyesight. Of course, Amon said no and gave the Taraculus to Link, just in case. They also discussed the issue of tactical cooperation. Madanzo, of course, was the meat shield, standing at the forefront and fighting hard. Link was behind him, casting magic to contain the ironbacks to prevent a sneak attack. Amon, on the other hand, was watching from a high place and focusing on the king of the ironbacks. If the king of the ironbacks really appeared, he only needed to use magic to force it back. If so, it would prove that they had the opportunity to lead their people to collect the rich damask sand here. When they set off, Amon carried the iron branch and habitually carried a leather bag. He had not intended to take Schrödinger with him, but as soon as the cat saw Amon carrying a leather bag on the road, it naturally jumped onto his shoulder, opened the bag with its claws and got in by itself, its movements seeming light and practiced. The 3 men and 1 cat walked down the mountain, through the jungle and came to the pool again. It was noon. The horseshoe-shaped mountain wall surrounded a deep pool, and looking closely, there was a hole in the middle of the mountain wall near the water surface. The hole was half submerged in the water, which should be the lair of the king of the ironbacks. Amon quietly climbed to the highest point of the mountain wall. Metatro stood on the slope near the pond and pulled out his sword. Just as he was about to make a move, Link behind him said in a mocking tone, "Don't move, watch me." Chapter 31. Link held the Taraculus in his left hand and waved the bone club in his right hand. He shook his head and mumbled something with a proud look on his face. It was impossible for him to use 2 staffs at the same time. The Taraculus could also be used as a medium to cast magic, but Link was used to waving the chief's scepter. As he cast the spell, the calm pool began to move, and a whirlpool formed in the center. The whirlpool grew larger and larger, and the water seemed to become very heavy. It flowed at a slower speed and slapped against the rocks with a heavy hum. Link was still using the earth magic he was best at. If there was something hidden in the pool, it would not be able to bear it. Sure enough, a strange roar came from the mountain wall near the water, and suddenly 4 big ugly heads emerged from the water. Their bloody mouths were full of sharp fangs and could swallow half a person's body. One of the heads saw Madanzo at the edge of the water and immediately shrank back. It was probably the big ironback whose claw Madanzo cut off last time. Madanzo had already pulled out his sword and was on full alert. At this moment, something unexpected happened. A long whip with golden spots suddenly flew out of the pool near the shore without a sound and lashed in the direction of Madanzo and Link. Upon closer inspection, it was the tail of an ironback beast, but it was obviously longer and thinner than the tails of those big ironbacks. The dark horny scales were covered with golden spots, and it came in a hurry without the slightest sound of the wind. The tail was slightly rolled down from mid-air, drawing an arc around Madanzo in front and going straight for Link behind. If it hit, Link would die on the spot. Metatro roared as he raised his sword and slashed upwards. The sword gave off a dazzling light, and at the same time, it brought with it an invisible force that seemed to be able to support the heavens and the earth. It stopped the tail from falling and was frozen in the air by the sword light. The magic combined with his sword skills was much more powerful than before. The sword did not directly hit the long tail, but it made a sound like gold and iron colliding. It was as if Metatro had blocked the long tail, preventing it from hitting his head. His boots were also stuck in the mud. Obviously, he was under a lot of pressure. The long tail actually had the heavy effect of earth elemental magic. But don't forget that the tail was soft. The middle part of the tail arched upwards with the sword, and the tip still whipped towards Link, but it was a little slower and less powerful. While Metatro was swinging his sword, Link had also cast a divine spell to protect himself. It was an earth elemental divine spell with heavy and slow effects, but it didn't have much of an effect. The sudden sneak attack should be the Ironback King. Its long tail in the water was extremely powerful, as if it didn't care that its body felt heavier, nor did it slow its speed too much. Link's line of sight was blocked by Metatro while he was casting a spell. He looked up and saw Wei Wei coming towards him, but it was too late to dodge. In a moment of desperation, he unleashed his incredible potential and summoned an earth elemental defense with the help of the Taraculus. The long tail whipped up a yellow-gray light, shattering the earth elemental defense summoned by Link, and the tail swept his left wrist. The long tail whipped out a yellowish-gray light, shattering the earth elemental defense that Link had summoned. The tail then swept across Link's left wrist. Fortunately, both Madanzo and he blocked it, otherwise his head would have been whipped on the spot. Fortunately, both Madanzo and he blocked it, otherwise his head would have been whipped on the spot. At this time, Amon shouted from high above, "You guys run." At the same time, there was a series of crisp sounds, as if many utensils had been broken. A giant beast suddenly leaped out of the water, but its forward movement was frozen. Coincidentally, a wave surged up from the pool and hit its body, turning into a layer of hard ice that froze it inside. The Ironback King finally showed its true face. It was about the same length as the big Ironback, even a little smaller, but its body shape was not quite the same. Its body was obviously slender, but its tail was very long, accounting for about 2/3 of the whole body length. The scales all over its body were covered with golden spots. As soon as it launched a sneak attack underwater, Amon, who was high above, felt that something was wrong. He sensed the fluctuations of the earth elements around him. It seemed that there was an Ironback here that could instinctively use the simplest earth element detection, and it could find the location of people on the shore without showing its face. Amon had also used this technique before, when he had used the fluctuations of the water element to detect Maki, who was following him. This Ironback King was very smart, and it knew how to avoid the strong and weak points. Its long tail went around in the air and directly attacked Link behind Madanzo, and it succeeded in one hit. Link made a mistake. He used his best earth elemental magic to deal with the Ironback King, but the Ironback King itself was also good at similar earth elemental power, and this power was much stronger than Link's, so the effect of the magic was greatly reduced. Seeing the power and speed of the Ironback King's long tail, Amon realized that Link's information was wrong. This Ironback King was definitely stronger than Madanzo, no less than an advanced warrior, and its mastery of earth elemental magic was also much stronger than Link's. Even if the two of them worked together, it would be difficult to deal with it. In an unexpected situation, it broke Link's left arm in one move. At such a close distance, of course, the two of them had to run for their lives. Amon also used his strongest magic skill, Ice Wave, to freeze the Ironback King that had just jumped out of the water. The Ironback Beast King struggled with all its might, and the layer of ice wrapped around its body cracked and immediately broke apart. Madanzo saw that the situation was not good, but he was very obedient, turning around and pulling Link to run. The running speed of a 4th-level warrior was amazing, especially when it was running for its life. Although it was pulling a person, it was still very fast. Fortunately, Amon cast a spell to block it, so that the two of them could run into the woods first. The Ironback King broke free from the shackles of the ice and immediately chased after them. The broken ice was rolled up by the sudden wind, turning into countless thin needle-like sharp ice crystals, shooting towards the eyes of the Ironback King in midair. The Ironback King closed its eyes, and the ice crystals could not cause any damage to its hard scales. It only paused for a moment, and then continued to rush forward, looking like it was going to catch up with Link and Madanzo, and its speed was not slower than the two of them. At this time, a fire suddenly ignited at the edge of the woods, and 2 trees that had just fallen were burning. This was not Amon's magic. When Madanzo fled into the woods, he swung his sword and cut down 2 trees in the way, and Link, whose arm was broken, used fire magic in the moment of life and death. This time, it was much more efficient than burning his own house. In an instant, the 2 trees were set on fire, and then his magic power was exhausted. The suddenly ignited fire blocked the way, and the Ironback King stopped and crouched on the ground, roared angrily, and jumped up with all its strength. Although this beast could not fly, it jumped very high, directly over the fire. When it landed, the damp soil inexplicably turned into a swamp, causing its heavy body to sink into it. Above the swamp, a layer of hard, stone-like soil surged up, pressing its head and front claws inside. Amon also cast earth elemental magic. He had no other way. This was the best way to stop the King Ironback's movements. The Ironback King in the soil let out a roar, and a faint layer of yellow light appeared on the surface of its body. It forced its way out, smashed through the hard soil, and continued to chase forward, its long tail raised in the air in an arc and disappeared into the trees. Amon cast spells to stop the Ironback King 3 times in a row, buying enough time for Madanzo and Link to escape, and then he could only wish the two good luck. Amon himself was also in trouble. As soon as the Ironback King disappeared into the trees, the fiercest big Ironback King had climbed up the mountain wall, opened its mouth with sharp teeth, and pounced on Amon. Amon was not tall, like an adult dwarf, holding a branch in his hand. Obviously, it was not as dangerous as a warrior's sword. It seemed to be defenseless, but this big Ironback had hit a nail on the head. The branch in Amon's hand was a whole piece of fine iron, not only a staff but also a weapon. It was much heavier than a warrior's sword, and it was just right for dealing with this big Ironback King whose skin was so thick that even a sword couldn't pierce through it. Amon looked down from above and hit the Ironback King's shoulder with all his strength, and at the same time, a gust of wind rolled its body out of the mountain wall. Not even the warriors or mages on the road had seen this scene, let alone the Ironback King. Amon could use the power of magic even when the staff hit the body directly. With one strike, the Ironback King was knocked down from the cliff. It fell into the pool, but there was no splash. Instead, there was a heavy sound, and several cracks appeared on the water surface. How could there be cracks on the water surface? There was a thick layer of ice in the pool, and the shape of the water surface was slanted and solidified. Just now, when Amon cast a spell on the mountain wall, a wave surged to the shore, and the water near the mountain wall sank. After the ice formed, the entrance to the nest was completely exposed. The turroculus that was knocked away fell into the pool and rolled along the slanted ice into the nest of the Ironback King. Amon could not lose this thing. There was a message left by Crazy Owl in it. In a hurry, he waved his staff to activate all the power of the Aquaticore, continuously making the ice thicker and thicker in the pool, so that the turroculus did not fall into the water and he could get it back. The big Ironback King did not break the ice when it fell. Then there was a loud bang, and another big Ironback King fell from the mountain wall and hit the turroculus. The two big Ironback beasts were all confused from the fall. The other big Ironback beast that was climbing up the mountain turned around and came down again. The last Ironback beast that had a broken claw never went up. Amon smashed one down with his iron rod and rolled the other down with his magic, mainly because he was standing in a good position and he was very skilled with all kinds of magic. Amon shouted and waved his staff again. A gust of wind blew, and a biting cold mist hit the four big Ironbacks on the ice. The big Ironback King, who had been frightened by him, turned around and went into the dense forest at the foot of the hill, giving up guarding the nest by the pool. Amon's magic was not only stronger than Link's, but his staff was also much more powerful. More importantly, he stood in the right position and used the right method. He knew the habits of the Ironbacks. They were animals that hibernated, and the cold would slow them down and make them fall into a deep sleep. Although the mutated big Ironbacks were much stronger than ordinary Ironbacks, they still had their natural habits, and they were finally driven away by the biting cold. Amon, however, did not dare to jump down the cliff to get the turroculus from the nest. He did not know if the four big Ironbacks had gone far. It was not fun to be surrounded at the foot of the cliff, and the king of the Ironbacks could come back at any time. When that time came, no one could cover him. At this time, he suddenly remembered that there was an accomplice in the leather bag on his shoulder. Schrödinger could obviously understand human language, and immediately patted the leather bag and shouted, "Schrödinger, go down and get the turroculus back, I'll protect you. If you don't go down, I'll throw you down." Before the voice died away, the cat jumped out of the bag with a whoosh and went down the cliff, much more agile and faster than the big Ironback King. It only disappeared for a moment at the bottom of the cliff, and immediately ran back up with a long, white thing in its mouth. Amon's nose was almost crooked with anger, and he shouted, "I want the turroculus, the black parangan, not this bone." Chapter 32. Schrödinger seemed a little unhappy as he put down the bone, turned around and ran down the mountain wall again, and soon jumped back up again, opening his mouth and spitting out the turroculus. Amon quickly put away the turroculus and shouted, "Schrödinger, let's go." The roar of the Ironback King came from the trees under the mountain wall again, mixed with the sound of shrubs and bushes being broken and swept away. It seemed that this fierce beast was quite angry. Amon turned and disappeared up high, and before leaving, Schrödinger still picked up the bone-like thing in its mouth and jumped into its leather bag. When the Beast King returned to the pool, the four big Ironbacks emerged from the trees, trembling with fear. In front of them was only the frozen pool and the entrance to the nest exposed above the water. The Ironback King crawled over the ice into the nest, and then let out an earth-shattering roar, shaking the nearby ice layer with a slight cracking sound. On a trail in the dense forest of the mountains covered by clouds, a pale and grimacing Link was anxiously discussing something with Madanzo. "That guy is really strong, chasing us for so long. Luckily he didn't run as fast as us on the mountain road, so he probably won't chase us again after we leave the territory. Mr. Amon is still at the pool. What do we do? Should I go back and gather the warriors of the clan to meet him?" Madanzo, will it be too late to wait for you to gather the people of the clan? Besides, can those so-called warriors of your clan stop the Beast King's tail? We've lured the Beast King away, and Amon can deal with the remaining 4 big ironbacks, so escaping shouldn't be a problem. He's much more capable than the 2 of us. Link panted and said, "You're right, Mr. Amon can deal with the 4 big ironbacks, but I'm afraid he'll run into the Ironback King on the way back." Madanzo spat at him. "Do you think Amon is as stupid as you?" That Ironback King roared as it ran. It was so loud that it could be heard from afar. I would have taken a detour to avoid it. The cold sweat on Link's forehead had yet to dry, but he was still unconvinced. "Why do you say that I'm stupid?" Madanzo grabbed his fur lapel and said, "If you're not stupid, who is? Who told me that the Ironback King is only as powerful as the 4 big ironbacks combined? Both of us weren't able to block its attack. Fortunately, Amon covered our escape." Link leaned against a rock by the roadside, his body shrinking down. "Be gentle, I'm hurt. An elder in our tribe told me about it. I didn't know it was like this." Madanzo snorted, "Old man? How old? Could it be that he had fought with the Ironback King?" "Nonsense, and you, as the chief, believed it. You almost got us both killed. I'm going to call that person over and ask him what he said." Link's facial features were already wrinkled. "There's no way to ask. The person who told me died last year. Let's not talk about this now. Amon hasn't come back yet. Should we go back quietly? I feel that we suffered because we didn't understand the situation just now. With your swordsmanship, you should be able to hold it for a while. If you're ready, you too can indeed hold it for a while, but you still have to run quickly. If you're slow, you'll still die. Link, where did you get the news that the Ironback King isn't difficult to deal with?" Amon's voice suddenly came from behind the rock. Following the voice, he went around the rock and came to the path. "You're back. I knew that with your skills, you'd be fine." The 2 shouted in surprise and joy. Link held his arm and said again, "The messenger of the gods, no, Ammonius. I've just explained, the old man who told me how powerful the Ironback King was died last year. He wanted to go to the pool to practice and show off his power, but it turned out to be asking for a beating." One of Link's arms was broken. Fortunately, Madanzo helped him fix it with a splint on the way. He would slowly recover after returning. Link fell ill after returning, moaning all day long. Not only was his arm uncomfortable, but his whole body seemed to be wrong. There was simply no good place left. While Amon was teaching Link some time ago, he himself had also practiced simple low-level healing magic. These days, he often helped Link treat his illness. However, he found that Link's illness was very strange. His own healing magic could only relieve his pain, but not eliminate his symptoms. Link had a lot of problems. It would either hurt here or there today. It was as if he was cursed by some god. Amon remembered his experience in Duk. There was a period of time when all kinds of old injuries repeatedly acted up, and even crazy Ol couldn't cure them. This was not an illness, but a test that a first-level warrior had to face to advance to a second-level warrior after awakening the power of 2 sides, the purity of the body. This kind of test came at the same time as the advancement of a first-level mage to a second-level mage. Of course, the reason why Link's test came so quickly was because he had learned incomplete earth magic since childhood, so his foundation was still good. But Link's foundation was poor in another aspect, and his body was not as good as Amon's. Amon's strong body not only benefited from the mining skills in Duk, but also from the mysterious cold pool. The dwarves lived in a harsh environment in the wild. They had suffered countless injuries, big and small. Some injuries seemed to have healed on the surface, but they still left hidden dangers in their bodies, which acted up again and again when the test came. Fortunately, Link was the son of the former chief, so he had not experienced too many dangers in the dwarven tribe. Otherwise, this test would be even more difficult. Now that Amon knew the reason, he told Link the truth, to overcome all kinds of suffering with a strong will, and not to give up the practice of body arts. This was a test and a threshold. After crossing it, he could become a second-level mage and practice body arts at the same time. Link was very scared at first, suspecting that there was some strange poison on the tail of the King Ironback, or that he was cursed by some unknown force. Hearing Amon's words, he was relieved. Although he was still groaning, Link still insisted on practicing body arts every day and often went to Madanzo for advice. Link exercised even though he was sick, and Madanzo was also not feeling well these days. He actually caught a cold. Madanzo really had a minor illness. He felt that there was something wrong with his body, and there was always a sense of powerlessness, which was completely different from a few days ago when he was full of energy but had nowhere to vent it. Since Amon knew healing magic, he also came to see Amon. Madanzo's situation made Amon ponder for a long time, and finally he vaguely confirmed one thing: he also encountered the test of body purity. Madanzo was already a 4th-level warrior, and he had passed this test by accident. When he was awakened to the power of 2 sides, it was much easier for him to go through this test again than it was for Link. It was just that he caught a cold by the pool a few days ago and had a minor illness. Amon told similar words to Madanzo. If he persisted, he could become a 2nd-level mage. Madanzo was overjoyed. Amon was slightly surprised that their second test came so quickly, but after thinking about it carefully, he felt that it was not unreasonable. They had practiced incomplete magic and body arts for a long time. Once the power of 2 sides was awakened, it would not be difficult for them to reach the peak of the 1st level. Seeing that the 2 students were almost at the same level as him, Amon, the teacher, was also troubled. The sign in Crazy Ol's prophecy did not appear, and he could not see the message left by the Taraculus. Whether it was the 2nd-level magic or the 2nd-level body arts, he had already practiced to the peak, but he still could not wait for the test of faith. Could it be that Crazy Ol's prediction was wrong? Amon was also a little uncertain. These days, when he was practicing the most basic meditation of magic, he was always restless and could not settle down. His power was almost not growing at all, as if the achievement of magic would never come to an end. Schrödinger, on the other hand, was very happy these days. He was always running around the village during the day. The people respected this cat very much, and regarded it as the servant of the gods. Needless to say, it was good to eat and drink. The lazy and greedy fat cat in Duk finally had the time to hold its head up high. It was living a good life in the caveman's tribe. Even its fur had become shiny and clean. Schrödinger took out a bone-like thing from the nest of the King Ironback and put it in his grass nest. He even pressed it with his paw when he slept. Amon also took it out and looked at it. It was flat, slender and curved, with one end pointed and the other blunt. It reminded people of the ship shape on the murals in the shrines. Seeing this thing, Amon subconsciously touched his ribs. It looked too much like a human rib. Its texture was completely different from ordinary bones. It was light and almost weightless, but it was unimaginably hard. Even a sharp iron knife could not leave a trace on it. Its surface was smooth like polished white stone. If it was a bone, it would have decayed long ago. Amon did not understand it. Anyway, it was something Schrödinger picked up, so he put it in its grass nest. If it were another time, Amon might try to study it in various ways. But recently he was not in the mood. Everything he did seemed absent-minded, and he was always easily irritated and distracted. Even when he saw a bird flying by, his mind would wander, but it seemed that he was not thinking about anything. Such a state made it impossible for him to practice magic. Was it because of the setback he suffered at the hands of the King Ironback in his first attempt? One night, Amon sat in his room to practice meditation again, but he could not settle down and enter the state of concentration. All kinds of messy thoughts came to him. He could not help but recall the things that happened in the faraway town of Duk. He was thinking about how his father was living. How much wine did he drink these days? What was the catastrophe predicted by Crazy Ol, and how would Duke be affected by it? The more he thought about it, the more he found it impossible to meditate. Realizing this, Amon sighed. But he heard Schrödinger also sigh in the grass nest. The sigh seemed to remind Amon of something. He suddenly slapped his head and said to himself, "How can I be so stupid? Isn't this the test of practicing magic? The firmness of faith is the stability of the soul and the firmness of the faith." Chapter 33. Everyone had moments when they were distracted, which normally wouldn't attract special attention. But for someone like Amon, who had always been calm, it was abnormal for a long time. He was already a second-level mage and had mastered the basic meditation of magic. But suddenly, he couldn't enter the state of concentration. There were always all kinds of distracting thoughts that he couldn't control. This was the obstacle he faced when he continued to practice magic. This obstacle didn't appear out of thin air. When a person's mind was calm, things that he might not think about or memories that he had forgotten would surface in the depths of his mind. A third-level mage could learn advanced magic. This required absolute peace of mind in the state of meditation. He had to enter a state where he wouldn't be disturbed by the messy information of the outside world and all kinds of distracting thoughts in his mind. So before that, he had to pass this test and enter an unprecedented state of subtlety. This test was called the firmness of faith. In fact, it was a test of a person's concentration and concentration. For a mage, faith was a very important help, because at this time, people often became irritated and distracted, doubting the magic they were learning and the teacher who taught them. Devout faith in the gods could help the heart settle down and break through to a deeper state of tranquility. If one understood the true meaning of this test, he should know how to face it. He didn't need to pray to the gods, because it was a test of himself after all. Amon suddenly understood. He also sighed that the more devout a person was, the easier it was for him to pass such a test. For a person like him, if he didn't understand the truth behind it, he would probably be stuck at this stage for the rest of his life. Amon had developed a very good habit since he was a child. He wouldn't dwell on useless things. He would focus on what he needed to do first. So he stopped thinking about how to pass this test, nor did he think about how to unlock the secrets of the gods. He just continued to practice the basic meditation every day and tried to stay calm in the state of various distracting thoughts. He also told Link and Medanzo not to disturb him during this time and to practice magic on their own. Medanzo had stayed in the dwarf tribe long enough this time. He was worried about the situation at home and needed to go back. Before leaving, he carried a heavy leather bag to say goodbye to Amon. Amon taught him the complete secrets of several kinds of low-level magic and told him what the next test was. Then he called Link together and asked them to make an oath. On the continent, people believed that oaths were effective, and the oath that Amon asked them to make was very special. It was to keep the secret of learning magic from him and not to use it to betray or hurt him. Otherwise, they wouldn't be able to pass the tests of firm faith, devil's temptation, integration of body and mind, and so on. This kind of oath was indeed very effective. Amon wasn't very clear about the next test, but after he understood firm faith, he also understood that in order to pass the test, there couldn't be any doubts in the mind. The oath was the seed sown in the faith. Metatro's backpack was filled with iron embryos and a few pieces of the best damask steel billets. As a dignified middle-ranked warrior, he actually did the hard work of climbing mountains with heavy loads. He also worked as a small merchant and smuggler at the same time. He really didn't learn body arts for nothing. Ordinary people couldn't do this kind of work. Amon asked curiously, "Aren't you tired? How much are these things worth?" Medanzo patted his bag and said, "Dozens of gold coins. Just these pieces of damask steel are worth 5 gold coins." He took out 3 pieces of damask steel the size of a fist from his backpack. They were the best refined iron that had been smelted but had not yet been made into objects. He showed them to Aman in a somewhat ostentatious manner. Aman had been dealing with iron mines and smelting furnaces since he was a child. His staff was made of the same fine iron, but in the kingdom of Babylon, this fine iron was called damask steel. Madanzo was showing off how valuable this thing was, but Aman was a little surprised. It turned out that this thing wasn't very valuable. After going through so many hardships to carry it out of the mountains, it could only be sold for 5 gold coins in the distant capital of Babylon. In Duk, fine iron was the exclusive resource of the kingdom. All the mined iron was handed over to the city. The town only paid the blacksmith's wages, not the money for the iron. Most of the time, the wages were paid directly with the ore cores. So Aman didn't know how much fine iron was really worth. After showing off, Madanzo put the 3 pieces of damask steel into his backpack and carefully put them away. He said to Aman, "What a great harvest this time. The most important thing is that I learned magic from you. You are my teacher and guide. In my heart, just like Link, I am willing to call you Ammonius. If you have time, you must go to Babylon City. I will do my best to give you the best hospitality. This time, I also made a small fortune." Aman thought for a moment and said, "I won't stay here forever. I do plan to go to Babylon City in the future. Take this parangan. Practicing magic requires a lot of energy. I'm afraid you don't have the time to run around and make money all the time." Aman casually gave Madanzo a parangan. Madanzo's eyes widened and Link's jaw almost dropped. The two were tongue-tied for a long time. Link panted and said, "Ammonius. You are too generous." Madanzo stammered, "My God. Aman, how can I accept such a precious gift from you?" Aman thought to himself, a parangan shouldn't be worth making such a fuss about, right? In Duk, where he lived, 1 parangan could only buy 2 barrels of the best wine. A merchant would at most give a goat as a gift. These 2 ignorant guys had never heard of the Taraculus before, so they didn't know how much the black parangan they used was worth. Otherwise, they would have fainted from shock. "This is not a gift. You made a vow to me and promised to wait for me in Babylon City. I taught you magic in the hope that you can focus on practicing magic. This is for you to go back and settle your family and yourself first. You should properly cultivate at home during this period of time. I will come to you in the future. Just wait for me." Aman smiled and said to Madanzo. He put the parangan in Madanzo's hand. Madanzo was so moved that he almost burst into tears. He patted his chest and said a lot of words of admiration. Aman had his reasons for doing so. He had never seen any noble mages on the continent who would work for a living, let alone travel thousands of miles to carry heavy iron ores on their backs for private transactions. Practicing magic also required a stable environment. Otherwise, Aman would not have chosen to stay in the tribe of the cavemen. It would take several months for Madanzo to go back and forth from the tribe. He would be lucky if he could bring back something worth dozens of gold coins. After deducting the cost of exchanging goods with the tribe and the travel expenses, he wouldn't even make half a parangan. Aman gave him a parangan, which was worth at least a year's profit from selling iron. Madanzo thanked Aman profusely and left. Before he left, he repeatedly begged Aman not to forget to go to Babylon City to find him. Link and Aman walked him out of the village. On their way back, Link looked at Aman pitifully without saying a word. Link's intention was obvious. They were both Aman's students. His teacher had given Madanzo such a precious thing, so maybe he would give him something too. Aman realized this. After returning to the village, he said to Link, "I have a story." A mayor asked a kid to look after his sheep for 2 silver coins a month. Later, the kid had something to do and couldn't look after the sheep anymore. He asked another kid if he could give him 1 silver coin for a month. The other kid agreed. Tell me, did the mayor owe him 1 silver coin? Aman's story was not made up. The mayor was Dusty, and the kid who took 1 silver coin to look after the sheep for a month was himself. Link was smart and immediately understood Amon's meaning. He hurriedly explained, "Ammonius, I didn't say anything. I didn't dare to ask you for parangons. I'm just a little envious of Madanzo. You taught me magic and gave me the power of the gods. I should only thank you and give you my good stuff. How can I say that you owe me anything?" Amon smiled. He went back to his hut and took out a beautiful copper bottle. He gave it to Link and said, "You and your people have been very respectful to me. I've enjoyed a lot of good food and wine. I'll give this bottle to you. As the chief, you still use clay pots to store wine in your house. You need this as a decoration. As for parangons, you already have them on your staff. As a sorcerer who practices magic privately, Madanzo often needs parangons. He often borrows your staff here. I've seen it." Link took the copper bottle. It was the most beautiful artifact in their tribe. No one here had ever seen it. Amon's father bought it for 15 silver coins. Schrödinger drank all the wine in it. The bottle was also very beautiful. Link held it in his arms as if it was a treasure and happily returned home. In the following days, Amon concentrated on practicing the basics of magic and meditating. The distracting thoughts gradually settled down. His soul seemed to have dived into a deeper and quieter world. As he sat there, it was as if there was another pair of invisible eyes that could see his body and mind and clearly know what he was thinking. He had an unprecedented experience, and the world outside his body became clear. The power practiced by mages required them to communicate with the outside world and learn how to control all kinds of energy. Only when one's mind was calm and could overcome the distracting thoughts could one perceive the world more clearly. One night, Amon was practicing meditation when he inadvertently entered this state. He unintentionally tried out an advanced magic, which was the detection magic that he had already experienced for a long time. In the dark, he could hear the subtle sounds outside the hut clearly without opening his eyes. Along with the sounds, he seemed to see insects crawling in the corner. He had successfully passed the test of firm belief. Being able to use at least one advanced magic was one of the requirements for a third-level mage. Although Amon had not read the ancient books on detection magic, he understood the most basic principle of the eye of puppetry from the integrated senses of all kinds of elements. There was a summary in the ancient books, and Amon had reached this step on his own. While he was carefully thinking about this novel method of detection, he suddenly heard the rumbling of thunder in the distance. Chapter 34. Ever since Amon's departure, the disaster of Duk had begun. On the third day after Amon left, the first boy died. He was the son of the missing warrior, Maki. Just like Amon, he was only 14 years old. Within a month, 3 more children died. The youngest was only 12 years old, and the oldest was no more than 15 years old. They were all boys. Shog, the priest and doctor, could do nothing about it. All the children died of sudden illness. When he examined them with healing magic, he could only find that their blood seemed to have been hit by an unbearable force. Shog speculated that it might be because they were still underage and had secretly learned the mining skills of Duk. The mining skills of Duk seemed simple, as if anyone could learn them. However, the consumption of energy was almost unbearable for underage children. When the accumulation reached a certain level, the hidden danger would suddenly erupt, and it would be too late. Aristotle had explained to Amon that the spiritual source of the ancient oracle was indeed protecting the inhabitants of this place, but Aristotle did not understand the subtleties of the miner's skill. Shog and Dusty could not punish the townspeople. For one thing, the children were dead, so it was pointless to punish them for not receiving the blessing of the patron. For another, the families who suffered the tragedy would not admit it, so no one had any evidence. Of course, there were more than a few families who let their children learn the skills of mining. Everyone seemed to know about it, but no one said anything. The reason for this was probably due to Amon. At the age of 14, Amon had not only mastered the technique of mining that had been passed down from generation to generation, but he was also lucky enough to obtain so many parangons, including a blue parangon that even Lord Shog envied. Since Amon could do it, why couldn't their children? The boys of Duk had been helping the adults in their families pull bellows and carry oars since they were young. They were much stronger than the children of the same age outside. Amon did not look the strongest among them. He was just the son of an old drunkard, forced to take on the heavy burden in advance. But what people did not know was that Crazy Ol had made Amon bathe in the strange cold spring for more than 2 years. Of course, there were also those who were lucky. Not all children would die young. Some could not learn, and a few were lucky enough to learn the mining skills of Duk in advance. Families like this would naturally not say anything, nor would they publicly announce that the god's stones were mined by their children. There was often only a fine line between ignorance and stupidity. Many people even inexplicably hoped that their children would be able to mine special parangons like Amon. The townspeople were still discussing in private that Amon might have mined a parangon called the god's tear, which was extremely precious. The lord from the king's city had publicly announced that the miners who mined the tear of God would be rewarded handsomely by the kingdom, but those who dealt with it privately would receive the harshest punishment. Except for Crazy Ol, Dusty and Shog, no one else in Duk had ever heard of the god's tear, let alone know what it was. No one knew who was the first to suspect that only children could mine such a parangon. Otherwise, why would Amon be the only one who found it after so many years of mining? The rumor gradually spread like a plague in Duk. People only talked about it in private but never in public. Finally, it led to continuous tragedies. It was said that the oracle of the goddess Murin, the protector of this place, had become non-existent, but people seemed to respect the goddess more than ever. They respected Shog the priest more than ever, not daring to look up at him and speak. Crazy Ol became crazier than ever. He often waved his staff in front of the shrine of Murin and shouted to himself, "This is a place detested by the god. It will be punished by the god." That god was so cruel. But the people here, what are you doing? No one paid attention to Crazy Ol's nonsense. They took a detour when they saw him. Dusty and Shog didn't pay attention to him either. They all thought he was crazy. But the tragedy in Duk did not stop. Several more boys died of sudden illnesses without warning. Didn't people know that the skills of miners were not suitable for children? Everyone was more or less aware of this, but there were other children who were lucky enough to succeed, not just Amon. So the tragedy of others was only seen as a kind of bad luck. Cautious people would remind their children to be careful and pay attention to their body at all times. But they didn't give up the idea of letting their children learn the skills. How many children in Duk learned the skills of miners in private? The answer was all boys over 10 years old. Everyone did it. No one had any reason not to do it. It was already a semi-public secret. People just tried to be careful not to let others get hold of any evidence, especially Mayor Dusty and Lord Shog. It was difficult to stop the spread of the disaster. Duk was not a small town, but only 2,000 residents. The skills of miners were passed down from generation to generation in a closed environment. The hot summer came. It was especially hot this year. Many people didn't sleep indoors at night. Instead, they slept in the yard or in the square, sleeping on straw mats or wooden planks until dawn. One night, people sleeping outdoors suddenly felt a slight chill. They opened their eyes and touched their bodies. To their surprise, they found that it was drizzling. Duk didn't have much rain in a year. Summer was the dry season. It almost never rained. Everyone cheered happily. The rain didn't stop after dawn. It grew heavier and heavier. The raindrops fell on the dry land like a curtain of water. The clouds in the sky stretched as far as the eye could see, covering the charcoal forest in the west and the Saya Desert in the south. People became more and more excited. They gathered in the shrine of Murin to thank the gods. Cheers could be heard all the time. The rain was heavy. It didn't stop for a day and a night. A rain like this could wet the barren land and desert. After the rain, a sea of grass would grow in the desert. This year, it would be a good time for sheep to graze. There had been such a situation in the past. But such a heavy rain only happened every few years. It had always been regarded as a gift from the gods. As if the gods had heard the prayers of the townspeople, the rain didn't stop for 3 days and 3 nights. Some people began to feel uneasy. This was something that had never happened before. The ravines in the charcoal forest were full of water. The low-lying areas of the post roads were flooded. More torrents flowed down from the Saya Plateau in the north, crossing the charcoal forest and approaching Duk. The whole town was surrounded by the muddy desert, the swampy jungle, and the flowing plateau. When people finally realized that something was wrong, they heard the rumbling of thunder in the sky. In the distance, the towering mountains of the Saya Plateau were shrouded in thick clouds. Lightning flashed between the rolling clouds. The people here had never heard of thunder before. They felt an indescribable fear. No one in Duk cheered. They hid in their houses and prayed to the gods, hoping that the rain would stop soon. However, the rain did not stop as people had hoped. After the thunder, the heavy rain that had been falling for 3 days and 3 nights suddenly turned into a torrential downpour. It was as if a huge hole had been torn in the sky. When the thunder sounded, the chief priest of the Saya shrine, the 8th level supreme mage Goliath, stood on the high city wall. Looking at the low clouds and raging lightning, he murmured, "Nietzsche, is this the catastrophe you prophesied? Is it really coming? But why are you still in Duk?" Chapter 35. Behind Goliath stood his student, Walter, and his youngest student, Raphael. The 2 young men did not know what their teacher was talking about, but they could tell that Goliath was in a bad mood. It seemed that Duk would inevitably be destroyed by the flood. They stood there in silence, not daring to say a word. Goliath stood on the city wall for a whole day. He tried to persuade him to take a rest, but he did not hear him. From day to night, he kept staring in the direction of Duk in the east. At noon the next day, the governor of Saya, Lord Shmuel, came to the city wall for the 3rd time. This time, he was not to persuade Goliath to go back to the shrine, but to report on official business. "I have ordered the soldiers stationed in the charcoal forest to withdraw." 2 of the stations were evacuated in time, but the flood came too fast. The station closest to Duk has been surrounded by the flood. The situation is unknown. Yesterday, you sent High Priest Kosman to the station to pick up the soldiers and investigate the situation in Duk, but he returned halfway. It is said that the passage is blocked. Raphael frowned and said, "How could Kosman be so irresponsible as to leave the soldiers at the station alone?" Goliath finally spoke. He heaved a long sigh and waved his hand. "You can't blame Kosman. The clouds are low, and there is lightning. Flying in the sky at this time will make him a target of the lightning. It will be life-threatening. I sent him to save people, not to kill himself. He really can't reach the station." As he spoke, the thunder in the distance became louder. Thick clouds spread from the direction of the Saya Plateau, almost pressing down on the city. Raindrops also fell from the city wall, and the rain was getting denser and denser. Shmuel asked anxiously, "If the rain doesn't stop, the flood will spread through the charcoal forest and reach Saya. 1/3 of the territory of the city has been flooded. What should we do?" Goliath turned around and said, "As the governor, you should prepare for disaster relief. Soon, more and more people will flood into Saya. Walter, go to the shrine and get 2 advanced air magic scrolls and the blue boat." "Walter, the deep blue boat? You mean the one with the aquatic ore embedded in it? The one that costs 4 parangons every time it's used?" Goliath said, "Yes, it's in my private warehouse in the back hall. Hurry up and give it to me. I'm going to the flood." Shocked, Shmuel tried to dissuade him. Dear Supreme Mage, are you going to take the risk yourself? The city of Saya still needs you to take charge. Walter also persuaded, esteemed teacher, please let me go. Goliath shook his head, since I can't fly, I'll go over by water. Only I can control the serene blue boat here, none of you can. I want to find out news of an important friend, and bring back the soldiers who are stranded in the station. This is an order. You don't have to try to persuade him. The blue boat was a shuttle-shaped magic artifact, also known as a magic artifact. It was only 2 inches wide and a foot long, silver in color, with a aquatic oar embedded in the front and 2 grooves on both sides. When Walter brought it, he had already inlaid 4 parangons in the grooves. It was a magic artifact from Goliath's private collection and was extremely precious, but no one knew that it was given to him by Nietzsche 20 years ago. Nietzsche was also one of the best master craftsmen on the continent. Even supreme mages did not dare to fly in the sky full of thunder and lightning. In order to save magic power, Goliath directly used an air magic scroll to float close to the water surface, his figure shuttling between the strange bushes of the charcoal forest. In principle, things like scrolls could not save magic power, but they could store the magic power that was normally used in a certain way and be used by the user at a critical moment. Magic scrolls were written in hieroglyphs according to specific requirements, and the production was much more difficult than the casting of the corresponding magic, consuming more magic power, and the production was not necessarily successful. Therefore, high-level magic scrolls were one of the most precious magic artifacts on the continent, and only a supreme mage like Goliath could casually order someone to get 2 of them. The water was not calm, surging with countless whirlpools and chaotic torrents, flooding through the charcoal forest towards Saya. Only the taller strange black rocks were still exposed on the water surface, forming isolated islands. The further he went, the more open the water became, the fewer islands with shrubs grew, the higher the water level, and the faster the current. Goliath walked against the current on the water surface, and the open areas could no longer use the islands and jungles to hide his figure. He became the most prominent target on the water surface. Several lightning bolts fell from the low clouds and struck him. Galia used his magic staff to block them, and his body teleported away so that he was not struck. Only a supreme sorcerer could move forward like this, no one else could. The closer he got to the town of Duk, the faster the muddy water, the larger the surging whirlpools, and the more frequent the lightning strikes. Although he could not see the flooded road, Goliath could still follow the original route. He finally came to the nearest post station 30 miles away from the town of Duk. The place was already a vast ocean. In the wind and rain, thunder and lightning, Goliath used detection magic to explore the surroundings, and finally heard a weak, hoarse cry for help. A small group of soldiers stationed at the post station had survived, and under the leadership of their captain, they climbed to the highest boulder nearby in time. The boulder was almost completely submerged by the flood, and 12 soldiers were holding on to the branches above the water surface, crying for help. Their voices were hoarse. If Goliath had been 1 step slower, these people would have been washed away. Goliath floated near the boulder, took out the blue boat from his bosom, and threw it on the water surface. The 1-foot-long magic artifact spun in the water, and suddenly an invisible boat appeared on the surging water surface. The water receded, revealing the shape of the bottom of the boat. The rain in the air could not hit the top of the boat, and it only flowed down from the sides. A bolt of lightning struck, and the electric filaments separated, outlining the outline of the boat. It looked like a long, narrow, and huge date pit, and it could accommodate a dozen people. Goliath waved his staff, and the outline of the boat emitted a layer of blue light, and finally appeared completely on the water surface. He shouted, "Get on the boat, don't panic. Is the captain still here? Tell the soldiers to stay in the boat, and don't move. This is a magic artifact, just jump on it." Under the command of the captain, the exhausted soldiers jumped onto the invisible ship that flashed with blue light. It was as if they were standing directly on the surface of the water, but the landing was very stable. Everyone was trembling, but the captain did not lose his order. The 12 people sat down neatly in 2 rows, and no one moved. Goliath glanced at the captain with slight approval in his eyes, and floated to the bow of the boat. He pointed his staff forward, and the blue boat did not go back, but continued to move forward in the direction of Duk. The captain was puzzled, but he did not ask the noble supreme mage what he was thinking. He just gestured to the soldiers to take a good rest, and not to disturb Goliath. Less than 10 miles from Duk, the blue boat was swaying slightly due to the raging mountain torrents. In the void, the shape of the blue aquatic ore was revealed, and on both sides of the boat, there were also 4 white lights, which were inlaid with 4 parangons. Dense lightning fell from the sky in the shape of bright branches, constantly striking the only object on the water surface. The seemingly invisible blue boat protected the people on board very well. The lightning only left traces of electric sparks in the air around it. The town of Duk was completely gone, and all that was left was a muddy sea. Even the strong and tall spires of the shrines had no trace of being submerged or destroyed. The flood flowed from the direction of the Saya Plateau to the Saya Desert in the south. Thick, ink-like clouds wrapped in heavy rain, it was like a dark hell. Even supreme mages did not dare to fly in such a sky, and the strongest swimmer could not struggle in such a flood for long. It seemed that there were no survivors in Duk. But Goliath stopped the blue boat in the distance, still looking at something in the storm. He did not believe that Nietzsche had been swallowed by the flood so silently. Since Goliath could take the risk to come here, then Nietzsche definitely had a way to escape safely. Had he already left, or was he still here? Goliath had an indescribable strong feeling that Nietzsche must still be here. Just as he was thinking about this, a series of thunder sounded in the sky. Balls of lightning fell, stirring up bright spirals in the water. Goliath suddenly sensed a strong wave of magic coming from the distance, and then he heard an angry roar, "God, you have finally appeared in the human world. I have been waiting for too long." A human figure suddenly flew out of the waves. The wind he stirred up spiraled around him, and the waves he stirred up formed a huge pair of crystal wings around his body. The figure flew straight to the sky, towards the thickest clouds and the densest lightning. It was crazy old Nietzsche. Nietzsche did not die, nor did he leave. He had been hiding in the water using some unknown method, and he just happened to rush out of the water and fly into the sky when Goliath arrived. The soldiers who had been sitting quietly on the blue boat cried out in surprise. Then they felt that they were surrounded by an opaque blue light, and they could not see or hear what was happening outside. This was because Goliath had used magic in time to block their sight and sound, not wanting them to see this scene. But Goliath could see crazy old clearly with his puppet eyes. His messy hair and beard fluttered in the air, and the staff in his hand emitted rays of golden light towards the sky. His eyes were wide open, and he roared, "Show yourself, Enrol, let me see your true face." Chapter 36. Nietzsche was courting death. His roar made Goliath's heart skip a beat, as if something was clenching it. Goliath was the priest of Enrol's temple. Enrol was the god of Hittite and Assur, and also the god that Goliath had always believed in. According to Crazy Ol, this disaster was caused by Enrol, and this god was right above the clouds. Goliath could not believe his eyes, let alone what he had just heard. Crazy Ol flew into the sky. Immediately, countless lightning bolts were attracted to him. His body was surrounded by bright golden threads, which were the golden light emitted by his staff. They drew the lightning away like a dense net. Nietzsche was more than 150 years old this year. He had been practicing magic for more than 120 years. Although he had never been able to advance to the 9th level, his magic power was incomparably vigorous. Now that he was putting his life on the line, the wind, rain, thunder and lightning couldn't do anything to him for a while. Seeing that he had already flown into the clouds, the thick lightning snakes that constantly flashed between the rolling dark clouds were the most fatal threat. Suddenly, Goliath's eyes widened. He found something incredible. The fiercest winds and thunderbolts in the clouds seemed to be controlled by someone and actually avoided Nietzsche's figure one after another. Nietzsche flew in the direction of the Saya plateau and waved his wand. Thousands of golden light ribbons danced in the air and tore apart the thunderous clouds. It seemed that he wanted to tear a hole in the sky and drag out the god in the clouds. Enril, you filthy, cowardly pig! Why don't you dare to face a mortal? Are you afraid? The clouds in the sky are trembling. Are you trembling in front of me? Nietzsche seemed to be looking for something in the sky. When he found nothing, he began to curse. Goliath couldn't help but tremble again. Even the staff in his hand was trembling. He had never heard of anyone who dared to curse the gods like this. On the other hand, Nietzsche didn't care at all. He was courting death by doing this, but he wanted the gods above the clouds to personally deal with him. A dignified voice finally came from the sky. You lunatic, how dare you offend me like this? Do you really think I don't dare to kill you? Poor mortal, you do not know the secrets of the gods. Goliath subconsciously wanted to kneel down. This voice had an indescribable sense of oppression in his soul. Although he had never heard it before, he naturally knew that the speaker was the god he had always believed in, Enril. This feeling was indescribable. Crazy Ol burst out laughing. Enril, the great god worshipped by countless people, you've finally been scolded by me. Come, come, come. Let's see if I can hurt you. I hope you won't dodge or be afraid. Crazy Ol laughed wildly and rushed to the place where the voice came from. He launched his strongest blow. He threw the staff in his hand. It burst into a dazzling golden light in the air, almost tearing all the dark clouds over Duk. At this moment, Goliath seemed to see a man standing above the clouds. No! It should be a god. Nietzsche finally saw the god, and he launched the strongest blow of his life to the god above the clouds. He didn't even care if he would fall from the sky or not. Goliath also saw the vague figure of the god, but it was only for a short moment. Then countless thick lightning bolts gathered from all directions, accompanied by earth-shattering thunder. The next moment, Goliath couldn't see or hear anything clearly. In the sky, Nietzsche turned into a ball of fire, shining as bright as the sun, and then he turned into ashes. Soon, everything returned to normal. The torn dark clouds gathered again, and the flood and storm were still raging. The blue boat suddenly shook violently. Goliath was so shocked that he almost lost control of his magic power. When he recovered, he quickly waved his staff to regain control of the boat. Great Enril, I swear on this life to believe in you, but I'm so lucky to see you in such a situation. Did you really bring this disaster upon us? Are you crazy? Nietzsche, you're going to die like this. No one can save you from the wrath of the gods. Goliath turned his staff, and the blue boat turned around and sailed in the direction of Saya. He sighed in his heart and looked back at the town of Duk that had disappeared in the flood. He saw another strange scene. Something glittering and translucent flew out of the water. It was a parangan. These were not parangons from the mines in the mountains, but those that had been mined by the miners of Duk. Some had not yet been handed over to the city, and some were kept by the people themselves. There were still a large number of parangons in the cellars of the Duk shrines. At this moment, they were all pulled up into the clouds by a magical force. Did the gods need parangons too? The wealth of the human world should have no meaning to them. But Goliath knew very well that parangons were not only expensive currency, but also the medium of magic. If the magic was too powerful, it could even damage the parangons. Could it be that the gods were using parangons to make up for the consumption of magic? On the way back, the turbulent flood could not stop the blue boat driven by an 8th-level supreme mage. However, Goliath gathered all his magic power and did not dare to relax, as if he was guarding against something terrible. The blue boat floated along the waves for 200 miles and came directly to the city of Saya. At this time, the city surrounded by high walls had become a huge island in the flood. The flood spread from the northeast, submerged the fields on all sides, and was about to reach the foot of the city wall. All the city gates had been closed, and straw bags were hastily stacked inside the gates to prevent the flood from overflowing. Goliath flew directly to the city wall with his staff, and then waved his hand to take back the blue boat. The artifact returned to its original size of more than a foot long. The blue aquatic ore was still intact, but the 4 parangons inlaid on both sides were full of cracks and immediately turned into dust after being removed. Shmuel had been waiting anxiously with his assistant on the eastern tower. Seeing that Goliath had returned safely, he hurriedly came up to him and said, "Dear Supreme Mage, you have finally returned. In just half a day, the flood has engulfed half of the wilderness of Saya, and our city is surrounded by water. Look, the water is still rising." His voice sounded like he was about to cry. If Goliath did not return soon, he would probably jump off the city wall. Goliath did not have time to talk nonsense. He immediately ordered, "Gather all the mages in the city." Walter replied, "Mages? They will lead everyone to pray to God Enlil in the shrine." Goliath could not explain anything, so he said in a low voice, "It's too late to pray. Gather quickly and set up the largest magic formation possible. Governor Shmuel, take all the parangons in the cellars of the shrine of Saya, including all the parangons in the treasury of the city. Take them and line them up on the city wall. Walter, go and set up the simplest protective magic formation along the city wall. Just place the parangons where they can be activated." Shmuel was dumbfounded. All the parangons in Saya? Walter was also shocked. Even if we set up a circular defensive magic formation along the city wall, it would not be able to activate the power of such a large magic formation, let alone repel the flood. Goliath waved his hand. "I didn't intend to fully activate the power of the formation. Even a fraction of its power would be enough. Tell all mages to conserve their magic power. They only need to ensure that all the parangons are in a state of being activated by magic power and are integrated with the formation. Do it now. This is an order. Have Cosman take charge of the magic formation." At this moment, Raphael climbed up the city wall, panting. "Dear Master, Cosman has left. He took his family away with him using the Supreme Flying Scroll and the Flying Artifact. Before he left a message saying that he would go back to the capital to report the disaster and ask for help." Shmuel stamped his foot. "Lord Goliath and I should be the ones to report the disaster and ask for help. How could he go to the capital without permission? He's obviously running away with his family. Yesterday, I saw him in the shrine trying to predict the fate of Saya in the flood. Does he think that the city will be destroyed by the flood?" Walter scolded, "How could he use prophecy magic? How could he predict such a big event? What a shameless person." Goliath didn't have time to waste. He waved his hand to interrupt them and said to his youngest disciple, "Raphael, I'll send you to the capital to report the disaster and ask for help from the nearby cities. Take these 3 scrolls with you and use the white scroll to catch up with Cosman. Kill him with the golden scroll without saying a word, then go to the nearest city and return to the king's city." With a shake of his hand, he took out 2 small magic scrolls less than 3 inches long, one white and the other gold. He gave them to Raphael together with the Supreme Air magic scroll that he hadn't used before. Then, he said to Shmuel with a sullen face, "Cosman, the high priest of the Saya shrine, deserted his post and ran away. I've ordered him to be killed. Tell the whole city about this." After saying this, the Supreme Mage seemed to be very tired. He walked down the wall with his staff. Shmuel shouted behind him, "Where are you going, Supreme Mage?" Walter also shouted, "Master, Cosman has run away. Who will take charge of the magic array on the wall?" Goliath replied as he walked down the wall, "Walter, you're the strongest mage here besides me. You'll take charge of the array. You don't have to exert too much power, just meet my requirements. Governor, please send all the mages to the wall. I want to pray to God Enlil alone in the shrine." No one is allowed to disturb me. Chapter 37. Goliath saw with his own eyes the scene of Nietzsche rushing into the sky to challenge the god Enlil. He had a strong feeling that Nietzsche seemed to have known that he would go and deliberately waited until the moment he appeared. He wanted Goliath to see it, as if he wanted to tell him something through this scene. Perhaps Nietzsche wanted to confirm something important, to find some kind of answer, but the madman could not tell the truth himself, so he needed a bystander to discover the mystery. Why did Nietzsche choose Goliath? Because no one else was more suitable than Goliath. He was the only supreme mage who would be there. Did Enlil really cause the flood? Why did the god do this? Goliath came to the empty main hall of the shrine of Saya with lingering questions. He knelt before the statue of Enlil and prayed, "Great God, great Enlil, please tell me, your follower, why did the flood come? Why did Duk disappear?" While praying, Goliath suddenly felt a strange feeling. There seemed to be a pressure on his shoulders. The statue in the center of the hall seemed to come to life, looking down at him. Before today, under the gaze of the statue, Goliath would have felt only peace, luck, and glory. But now it was very different. He felt a creepy fear. While praying, he still clenched his staff and secretly channeled all his power. Goliath's staff was made of the best century-old walnut wood. The lines were neat and beautiful, and it had a glossy luster after years of holding it in his hand. The tip of the staff was inlaid with a turquoise, but it was cleverly wrapped in wood grain. It looked a bit like the staff of an old man, but it was very elegant and exquisite. "My priest, my devout believer, why are you channeling your power when you are praying? Do you have any hostility towards me?" A thunderous voice suddenly came to Goliath's mind. It was Enlil speaking. Goliath bowed his head and knelt on the ground. He looked very respectful, but he did not let go of the staff. He spoke to the voice in his soul, "Enlil, my god of gods, was it you who destroyed the town of Duk? Did you let the flood surround Saya? I just want to know the answer." It was the flood that destroyed Duk. It was the heavy rain that brought the flood. It was the warm and humid wind from the sea that mixed with the swirling air currents of Assyria that caused the heavy rain. It was my divine power that caused the air currents to swirl in the highlands. It was my anger that guided the lightning in the clouds, answered the god. His voice was majestic and almost emotionless. The answer seemed to have a deeper meaning. Goliath was silent for a moment. No one knew what he was thinking. Finally, he sighed and said, "The flood has reached the city of Saya. Dear God, I have taken out all the parangons in the city and set up a great formation. If you can save the city and stop the disaster that engulfs Saya, I will offer them all as a sacrifice to you." Enlil's voice revealed a trace of mockery. "Sacrifice? This is a shrine that worships me. Have I ever taken any wealth from this shrine? Aren't the sacrifices that I receive in my name all for the enjoyment of you priests and priests? How ridiculous! Do you think that the gods can be bought with the wealth of the world?" Goliath replied respectfully, "Great Enlil, this is not a bribe, but a prayer. If the flood inevitably destroys Saya, then this magic formation will be the last defense of the city walls. This is not to fight against the gods, but to protect the people here who offer sacrifices to the gods. This is the faith of millions of people, no matter where the flood comes from." No one in Saya knew why Goliath took out all the rings of parangons and arranged them on the city walls. In theory, no one could fully activate the power of such a formation, even if all the mages in the city gathered together. But Goliath only asked for the formation to be completed. He only wanted to activate all the parangons and merge them with the formation. He was betting that Enlil would not be able to take the parangons away by force. Above the flooded town of Duk, Goliath saw many parangons being pulled into the clouds by a strange force. He guessed that the gods might be using the parangons to cast powerful magic. The power of this magic was so great that many parangons would be needed to supplement it. Saya was the most important producer of parangons in the Hittite kingdom. There were many parangons stored in the temples over the years. The treasury of the city also contained the kingdom's tax revenue. Goliath took them all out. He tried to negotiate with the gods. If the power of the gods could immediately make the flood recede, then he would let the gods take the parangons away. If not, the magic formation would not only protect the city walls, but also prevent the activated parangons from being taken away by others. Even the gods could not do this. A parangon could be embedded in a staff, and a mage could take away his staff if he defeated him. But when two mages fought with magic, one mage could not directly take away the parangon from the other's staff. The parangon was one with the mage's power. Enrol suddenly fell silent. Goliath lay on the ground and waited quietly. After a long time, he heard the voice of the god again, with laughter echoing in the void. "Poor priest, I wonder how you will face the faith in your heart. You do not understand the gods. The people here revere and worship me. I will not take away the parangons on the city walls. They are the wealth of the whole city. If I do that, everyone will hate me and stay away from me. Do you want me to destroy the dignity of the temple? But what about Duk? No one survived the flood." Goliath shouted in his soul. "The flood is my blessing to Saya. I will hear the cheers of the people, and my temple will be flooded with believers to express their gratitude. You will understand all this soon. As for Duk, do you want to ask me why I did not save them from the flood? Why should I save them? How ridiculous it is for me to explain such a boring question to a mortal like you." Enrol's voice said these words. At the same time, a message suddenly appeared in Goliath's mind, containing all kinds of sounds and images. It was a series of tragedies that happened in Duk. "Priest, do you see it? They have betrayed the oracle of the patron. There is no reason for Murin to stay there, so I will bless this place again. The flood is my blessing, but people should not only ask to enjoy the blessings of the gods. I do not need to save the sinners from the flood." Enrol's voice sounded again, as if it was an irresistible judgment. Goliath was stunned for a long time. He struggled to ask again, but the whole town of Duk was destroyed. There must be innocent people. Enrol's voice became contemptuous. When evil spreads to every corner, the flood will not distinguish who is innocent. I do not need to save the sinners from the flood, nor do I need to save the so-called innocent people. In my eyes, they all belong to the Dushians and have betrayed the protection of the oracle. Mortals will usher in death in a short life, one way or another. Do not forget that they are all members of Duk. Everyone has a responsibility. They should blame their clansmen for the disaster, and they should also blame themselves for not doing anything to save it. Since there is no way to save it, then the whole ship will be destroyed." The words of the gods were not easy to understand. Enrol said that the flood was his blessing, and Duk did not deserve to be saved from the disaster. Goliath finally raised his head and asked, "Great God, did you bring the flood?" Enrol said coldly, "I will not answer such stupid and ignorant questions again." Goliath asked again, "Then what will be the fate of Saya?" Enrol said, "You have to ask yourself." After saying this, he went silent. Goliath felt the oppressive feeling of being stared at by the statue disappear. The god was gone. Goliath was silent for a long time in the shrine, carefully recalling the words of the god and the scene when Nietzsche rushed into the sky, pondering every detail he saw in the flood. What did Nietzsche want to tell him? What did Enrol mean? He meditated alone for a night, and when a glimmer of light appeared in the distant sky, he suddenly understood something. Enrol only summoned a heavy rain. As Goliath saw it with his own eyes, he might have used the simplest air magic, but it contained almost infinite divine power. Enrol used his divine power to change the direction of the swirling airflow on the Saya Plateau, making it collide with the warm and humid wind blowing from the sea, thus triggering a continuous rainstorm. The god in the clouds only manipulated the wind and lightning. When the airflow in the sky collided and formed a natural whirlpool, there was no need for him to use his divine power anymore. The rainstorm would continue until the end. To stop the rain would consume more divine power than to activate it. Enlil only activated it, and had no intention of wasting more power to stop it. In the silent shrine, Goliath's body was trembling as if he was sick. He looked cold, but his face was red. As the chief priest of the shrine of Saya Enlil, a supreme mage who had sworn an oath before the god, he had only 3 choices in the face of all this. One was to devoutly preach Enlil's miracles and believe without hesitation that it was a blessing to Saya, washing away the sins of Duk. Goliath had already guessed what Enlil meant when he described the disaster as a blessing. If that was the case, Goliath would still be the old Goliath, and nothing had changed. But he could not forget the scene of crazy Ol rushing into the sky. That scene had been deeply imprinted in his soul. The second was to turn his back on Enlil. This was against his oath and faith. When his faith was shaken, his achievements in magic would be greatly affected, and he might even lose his power. The third was the most difficult. He had to look at everything calmly and rationally, review his life and the experiences of others, and reach a higher state of detachment. Goliath inexplicably recalled the records in the ancient books of magic. In order to achieve the final 9th level, a mage had to face the final test. He had never been able to understand it. Was this what it meant? It was too difficult. It would swallow his soul. No one knew how Goliath spent the night in the shrine. How did he pray to the god? When he walked out of the shrine after dawn, people found the noble supreme mage with an indescribable sense of haggardness and helplessness hidden in his eyes. The god has given the oracle. This is the test the city faces. After the flood, there will be blessings. But whether we can usher in blessings or not, it's all up to us. Don't ask what the god has given us. Follow me to the wall to fight against the flood. This is our fight. Goliath said to everyone, and then went up the tower with his staff in hand. When Goliath came to the wall again, the water had risen to a height of 2 people and was still rising slowly. Looking out, it was really clean. The city of Saya was like a huge lonely boat protected by the wall in the flood. The wall looked strong, but the water outside the city was higher than the ground inside the city. It would bear more and more lateral pressure. After all, the wall built in this arid area was not a dam. The weak parts of the wall might not be able to bear this kind of pressure, and as the water soaked longer and longer, the difference in pressure caused by the water level would increase. Some parts of the wall would become soft and loose, collapse or leak. At this time, the magic formation played its role, connecting the whole circle of the wall into one. Either it would collapse completely or it would remain intact until the end. Goliath slowly walked around the city. The Taraculus in his staff stimulated the divine power, using the simplest and most useful earth magic to strengthen every section of the wall. For the time being, he could not think about anything else. He could only think about 2 things: would the flood eventually rise to the lowest part of the wall, and would the flood recede before its power was exhausted? The supreme mage had not rested for several days and nights. He walked around the city slowly without stopping. His face was solemn and devout, but there seemed to be a crystal light flashing in his eyes. From time to time, he would look up at the eastern sky. In the east that Goliath looked at, in the deep mountains of the Euphrates Valley, in the tribe of cavemen, a god was also crying. Of course, he was not a real god like Enlil, but he was regarded as a messenger of the gods by the tribe. Some people even called him Harmonious. The cry came from the big cave where the fire was burning. The chief Link and the tribesmen looked at each other, but no one dared to disturb him. Only Schrödinger squatted at the mouth of the cave, looking at Amon with a strange look of pity. Chapter 38. Goliath saw with his own eyes the scene of Nietzsche rushing into the sky to challenge the god Enlil. He had a strong feeling that Nietzsche seemed to have known that he would go and deliberately waited until the moment he appeared. He wanted Goliath to see it, as if he wanted to tell him something through this scene. Perhaps Nietzsche wanted to confirm something important, to find some kind of answer, but the madman could not tell the truth himself, so he needed a bystander to discover the mystery. Why did Nietzsche choose Goliath? Because no one else was more suitable than Goliath. He was the only supreme mage who would be there. Did Enlil really cause the flood? Why did the god do this? Goliath came to the empty main hall of the shrine of Saya with lingering questions. He knelt before the statue of Enlil and prayed, "Great God, great Enlil, please tell me, your follower, why did the flood come? Why did the town of Duk disappear?" While praying, Goliath suddenly felt a strange feeling. There seemed to be a pressure on his shoulders. The statue in the center of the hall seemed to come to life, looking down at him. Before today, under the gaze of the statue, Goliath would have felt only peace, luck, and glory. But now it was very different. He felt a creepy fear. While praying, he still clenched his staff and secretly channeled all his power. Goliath's staff was made of the best century-old walnut wood. The lines were neat and beautiful, and it had a glossy luster after years of holding it in his hand. The tip of the staff was inlaid with a turquoise, but it was cleverly wrapped in wood grain. It looked a bit like the staff of an old man, but it was very elegant and exquisite. "My priest, my devout believer, why are you channeling your power when you are praying? Do you have any hostility towards me?" A thunderous voice suddenly came to Goliath's mind. It was Enlil speaking. Goliath bowed his head and knelt on the ground. He looked very respectful, but he did not let go of the staff. He spoke to the voice in his soul, "Enlil, my god of gods, was it you who destroyed the town of Duk? Did you let the flood surround Saya? I just want to know the answer." It was the flood that destroyed Duk. It was the heavy rain that brought the flood. It was the warm and humid winds from the sea that converged with the swirling air currents of Assyria that caused the heavy rain. It was my divine power that caused the air currents to swirl in the highlands. It was my anger that guided the lightning in the clouds. The voice of the god was majestic and almost emotionless. The answer seemed to have a deeper meaning. Goliath was silent for a moment. No one knew what he was thinking. Finally, he sighed and said, "The flood has reached the city of Saya. Dear God, I have taken out all the parangons in the city and set up a great formation. If you can save the city and stop the disaster that engulfs Saya, I will offer them all as a sacrifice to you." Enlil's voice revealed a trace of mockery. "Sacrifice? This is a shrine that worships me. Have I ever taken any wealth from this shrine? Aren't the sacrifices that I receive in my name all for the enjoyment of you priests and priests? How ridiculous! Do you think that the gods can be bought with the wealth of the world?" Goliath replied respectfully, "Great Enlil, this is not a bribe, but a prayer. If the flood inevitably destroys Saya, then this magic formation will be the last defense of the city walls. This is not to fight against the gods, but to protect the people here who offer sacrifices to the gods. This is the faith of millions of people, no matter where the flood comes from." No one in Saya knew why Goliath took out all the rings of parangons and arranged them on the city walls. In theory, no one could fully activate the power of such a formation, even if all the mages in the city gathered together. But Goliath only asked for the formation to be completed. He only wanted to activate all the parangons and merge them with the formation. He was betting that Enlil would not be able to take away the parangons by force. Above the flooded town of Duk, Goliath saw many parangons being pulled up into the clouds by a strange force. He guessed that the gods might be using the parangons to cast powerful magic. The power of this magic was so great that many parangons would be needed to supplement it. Saya was the most important producer of parangons in the Hittite kingdom. There were many parangons stored in the temples over the years. The treasury of the city's finance department also contained the kingdom's tax revenue. Goliath took them all out. He tried to negotiate with the gods. If the power of the gods could immediately make the flood recede, then he would let the gods take the parangons. If not, Then the magic formation could not only protect the city walls, but also prevent the activated parangons from being taken away by others. Even the gods could not do this. A parangon could be embedded in a staff, and a mage could take away his staff if he defeated him. However, when two mages fought with magic, one mage could not directly take away the parangon from the other's staff. The parangon was one with the mage's power. Enrol suddenly fell silent. Goliath lay on the ground and waited quietly. After a long time, he heard the voice of the god again, with laughter echoing in the void. "Poor priest, I wonder how you will face the faith in your heart. You do not understand the gods. The people here revere and worship me. I will not take away the parangons on the city walls. They are the wealth of the whole city. If I do that, everyone will hate me and stay away from me. Do you want me to destroy the dignity of the temple? But what about Duk? No one survived the flood." Goliath shouted in his soul. "The flood is my blessing to Saya. I will hear the cheers of the people. My temple will be flooded with believers to express their gratitude. You will understand all this soon. As for Duk, do you want to ask me why I did not save them from the flood? Why should I save them? How ridiculous it is for me to explain such a boring question to a mortal like you." Enrol's voice said these words. At the same time, a message suddenly appeared in Goliath's mind, containing all kinds of sounds and images. It was a series of tragedies that happened in Duk. "Priest, do you see it? They have betrayed the oracle of the patron. There is no reason for Murin to stay there, so I will bless this place again. The flood is my blessing, but people should not only ask to enjoy the blessings of the gods. I do not need to save the sinners from the flood." Enrol's voice sounded again, as if it was an irresistible judgment. Goliath was stunned for a long time. He struggled to ask again, but the whole town of Duk was destroyed. There must be innocent people. Enrol's voice became contemptuous. When evil spreads to every corner, the flood will not distinguish who is innocent. I do not need to save the sinners from the flood, nor do I need to save the so-called innocent people. In my eyes, they all belong to the Dushians and have betrayed the protection of the oracle. Mortals would face death in their short lives, no matter which way it was. Do not forget that they are all members of Duk. Everyone has a responsibility. They should blame their clansmen for the disaster, and they should also blame themselves for not doing anything to save it. Since there is no way to save it, then the whole ship will be destroyed." The words of the gods were not easy to understand. Enrol said that the flood was his blessing, and Duk did not deserve to be saved from the disaster. Goliath finally raised his head and asked, "Great God, did you bring the flood?" Enrol said coldly, "I will not answer such stupid and ignorant questions again." Goliath asked again, "Then what will be the fate of Saya?" Enrol said, "You have to ask yourself." After saying this, he went silent. Goliath felt the oppressive feeling of being stared at by the statue disappear. The god was gone. Goliath was silent for a long time in the shrine, carefully recalling the words of the god and the scene when Nietzsche rushed into the sky, pondering every detail he saw in the flood. What did Nietzsche want to tell him? What did Enrol mean? He meditated alone for a night, and when a glimmer of light appeared in the distant sky, he suddenly understood something. Enrol only summoned a heavy rain. As Goliath saw it with his own eyes, he might have used the simplest air magic, but it contained almost infinite divine power. Enrol used his divine power to change the direction of the swirling airflow on the Saya Plateau, making it collide with the warm and humid wind blowing from the sea, thus triggering a continuous rainstorm. The god in the clouds only manipulated the wind and lightning. When the airflow in the sky collided and formed a natural whirlpool, there was no need for him to use his divine power anymore. The rainstorm would continue until the end. To stop the rain would consume more divine power than to activate it. Enrol only activated it, and had no intention of wasting more power to stop it. In the silent shrine, Goliath's body was trembling as if he was sick. He looked cold, but his face was red. As the chief priest of the shrine of Saya Enril, a supreme mage who had sworn an oath before the god, he had only 3 choices in the face of all this. One was to devoutly preach Enril's miracles and believe without hesitation that it was a blessing to Saya, washing away the sins of Duk. Goliath had already guessed what Enril meant when he described the disaster as a blessing. If that was the case, Goliath would still be the old Goliath. Nothing had changed. But he could not forget the scene of crazy Ol rushing into the sky. That scene had been deeply imprinted in his soul. The second was to turn his back on Enril. This was against his oath and faith. When his faith was shaken, his achievements in magic would be greatly affected, and he might even lose his power. The third was the most difficult. He had to look at everything calmly and rationally, review his life and the experiences of others, and reach a higher state of detachment. Gallier inexplicably recalled the records in the ancient books of magic. In order to achieve the final 9th level, a mage had to face the final test. He had never been able to understand it. Was this what it meant? It was too difficult. It would swallow his soul. No one knew how Goliath spent the night in the shrine. How did he pray to the god? When he walked out of the shrine after dawn, people found the noble supreme mage with an indescribable sense of haggardness and helplessness hidden in his eyes. The god has given the oracle. This is the test the city faces. After the flood, there will be blessings. But whether we can usher in blessings or not, it's all up to us. Don't ask what the god has given us. Follow me to the wall to fight against the flood. This is our fight. Goliath said to everyone, and then he climbed the tower with his staff in hand. When Goliath came to the wall again, the water had reached the height of 2 people and was still rising slowly. Looking out, it was really clean. The city of Saya was like a huge lonely boat protected by the wall in the flood. The wall looked very strong, but the water outside the city was higher than the ground inside the city. It would bear more and more lateral pressure. After all, the wall built in this arid area was not a dam. The weak parts of the wall might not be able to bear this kind of pressure, and as the water soaked longer and longer, the pressure difference caused by the water level would increase. Some parts of the wall would become soft and loose, collapse or leak. At this time, the magic formation played its role, connecting the whole circle of the wall into one. Either it would collapse completely or it would remain intact until the end. Goliath slowly walked around the city. The Taraculus in his staff stimulated the divine power, using the simplest and most useful earth magic to strengthen every section of the wall. For the time being, he could not think about anything else. He could only think about 2 things, whether the flood would eventually rise to the lowest part of the wall, and whether the flood would recede before its power was exhausted. The supreme mage did not rest for several days and nights. He walked around the city slowly without stopping, his face solemn and pious, but there seemed to be a crystal light flashing in his eyes. From time to time, he looked up at the eastern sky. In the east that Goliath was looking at, in the deep mountains of the Euphrates Valley, in the tribe of cavemen, a god was also crying loudly. Of course, he was not a real god like Enril, but he was regarded as a messenger of the gods by the tribe. Some people even called him Harmonious. The cry came from the big cave where the fire was burning. The chief Link and the tribesmen looked at each other, no one dared to disturb him. Only Schrödinger squatted at the entrance of the cave, looking at Amon with a strange look of pity. Chapter 39. Amon was crying for crazy Ol, for his father, and for Duk. He already knew the news of the disaster, and it was confirmed by the message left by the Taraculus. Nietzsche was dead, his father was dead, Mayor Dusty was dead. No one survived the flood. When he heard the thunder and saw the dark clouds hanging low in the east, Amon knew that it was raining heavily. In his 14 years of life, he had never seen Duk raining in summer, nor had he seen it raining for so many days in a row. When the thunder became louder and denser, and the clouds rolled and piled up, Aman also realized what was going to happen. It was too late for him to return to Duk, because it was raining in the lower parts of the plateau as well. The torrents overflowed the valleys and formed dangerous whirlpools. There were no roads left. No wonder Crazy Ol told him to go to higher ground. Aman stood on a high slope and looked into the distance. He could see nothing but thick clouds and raging lightning. It was the direction of Duk. His eyes were filled with tears. Crazy Ol had said that the next message in the Taraculus would appear after the disaster, but Aman had not been able to read it. 2 days after the thunder, Aman vaguely heard a particularly shocking thunderclap. His heart tightened inexplicably. Suddenly, he felt as if the Taraculus in his arms was calling out to him. He immediately went back to the village and entered the quietest cave. He ordered everyone not to disturb him, and then took out the Taraculus. He tried again with the power of meditation, and then he heard and saw Crazy Ol's message. Crazy Ol's hair and beard were still messy, as if he was standing in front of him and talking. "My child, when you read the message, I have just left this life. You heard it right. I am dead, and your father is gone. I died of the wrath of the gods, because I wanted to fly to the sky and see the true face of the gods, to give the strongest blow of my life. I have been trying to unravel the secrets of the gods all my life, but I have never seen the gods, so I will not give up this last chance. You don't need to ask me why. I can tell you clearly that I'm tired of living. You can also think that I'm really crazy. I'm already 150 years old this year. Divine spells have made me very strong, as if I'm full of power, but this is already meaningless to me. I know you have questions in your heart, and I can explain them to you now. Do you want to ask me why I did not wait for you to unlock the secrets of the gods, and perhaps even make myself a god? Actually, I don't have much time left. Even if I could live to see that day, it would be impossible for me. I had taken the wrong path from the very beginning. Baal had told me all about it. You awakened the power of 2 sides and passed the test of desire. After becoming a level 1 mage and warrior, you passed the test of body purity and became a level 2 mage and warrior. I've seen all this with my own eyes, but you don't know that I can't repeat this path myself. Perhaps you find it inconceivable. I haven't trained my body for a long time, so my lifespan is far longer than that of a normal person. I still look strong and healthy, but the power in my bloodline is gradually weakening. Over the past 100 years, I've suffered countless injuries and illnesses that ordinary people can't even imagine. If I were to start again on this path, I wouldn't even be able to pass the test of body purity. Do you think it's funny that an 8th level mage can't even be compared to you? If you take the wrong path from the very beginning, the further you go, the higher your achievements, the harder it will be to turn back. So this is what I want to tell you, and also the reason why I asked you to find Baal's whereabouts. As far as I know, Baal may have found all the correct paths before becoming a senior rank mage and warrior. As for what he hasn't proved yet, you can only rely on yourself. You may ask me how I predicted this disaster. Just keep it as a secret forever. I've told you everything, and this is the final reservation. As for Duk, perhaps it deserved its destruction. People brought it upon themselves. I'm one of them. My death is the price I pay for everyone. At this point, Aman also received a message. It was similar to what Goliath had read in the shrine, but more detailed. It was about the series of tragedies that happened in Duk some time ago, including the origin of these tragedies. Aman couldn't help shouting in his mind, "Crazy Ol, you knew the disaster was coming. Why didn't you save everyone? My father died too, he was innocent." Crazy Ol seemed to have expected this question from Aman. He laughed out loud in the message he left, "Aman, do you want to ask me why I didn't save your father? Why didn't I save everyone? My child, I've already saved you and showed you the way to become a living being. Don't you feel grateful to me? I've experienced countless such questions in my life, and I think the gods are even more so." Aman was speechless for a moment. Then, he burst into tears like a child. No, it should be said that he was a child. Crazy Ol and his father had parted ways, ending their crazy and drunken lives. How could Aman not feel sad for the whole of Duk? He had to face the pain of death at such a young age. The destruction of Duk meant that he had no home or family. Aman felt abandoned by the whole world. Aman was not Goliath. He didn't see the scene where Nietzsche rushed into the sky with his own eyes. He didn't know how the flood happened. He only knew that Crazy Ol had predicted it. Aman didn't understand some of Crazy Ol's words. For example, he claimed that he died in the wrath of the gods. Why did he rush into the sky and strike the gods with his strongest blow? Which god was he facing? Crazy Ol didn't explain it to Aman. Maybe it was useless for Aman to explain. He hadn't reached the point where he could understand it all. In his grief, the ignorant teenager had no time to understand all this. Surrounded by great sorrow, Aman could no longer concentrate and maintain a focused state of meditation. The process of reading the information was interrupted. When he was tired of crying, he wiped his tears and remembered that he hadn't finished reading the message. So he tried to concentrate and reactivated the Taraculus. But there was an accident. Crazy Ol was not an omniscient god. He didn't expect that Aman had passed the test of faith and become a third-level sorcerer before the disaster came. Aman interrupted the last message and activated the Taraculus again. Crazy Ol's last message disappeared. Maybe there were some words that Aman didn't hear. What Aman read next were the secrets of advanced magic. Not all of them, but only the parts that could be learned by a third-level sorcerer. When he read the message, Aman had to stop thinking about anything and concentrate on the message, because it would only appear once and then disappear. Only by passing the test of faith could he enter a state of concentration where his soul was calm and not be disturbed by distracting thoughts. Only then could he remember so many complicated and profound messages at once. The third-level sorcerers were good at different kinds of magic, and their ability to use them varied greatly. But the standard of basic meditation was the same. At the end of the message, Crazy Ol left another message. My child, when you read this, you will already have a third-level achievement. I don't know if you have found Bear's whereabouts. The rest is on your own. You have nothing left, so you have nothing to worry about. The entire continent is waiting for you to explore it. I have given you my token, the plate with the emblem engraved on it. I haven't told you, but I also gave it to Bear. Bear sealed the message in the plate and asked Schrödinger to bring it to me. It used to be Bear's token as well. I have traveled all over the continent for 100 years. Many people have been indebted to me and have vowed to repay me or my descendants. Bear used to be one of the elders of the Magic Council of the Empire of Igut. He taught many nobles and priests in magic. Many people have vowed to repay him. When you encounter difficulties in the continent, perhaps you can ask them for help. This is my last gift to you. However, after so many years had passed, it was hard to say whether or not there were still people who remembered the vow from back then, and whether or not they would really abide by it. Be careful and protect yourself. The identity of a little sorcerer is dangerous in the continent. The test of dealing with people may be more difficult than the test of magic. At the end of the message, a series of names and family introductions appeared. The first was the chief priest of the Saya Temple, Goliath. Crazy Ol especially told Aman that if he became a supreme sorcerer in the future, he must go to Goliath. There was also an introduction of the Medanzo family and an explanation of their background. What Crazy Ol did not know was that Aman had already met Medanzo and taught him magic. At dusk, Aman came out of the cave. His eyes were still red and slightly swollen. He looked very tired. At such a young age, he gave people an inexplicable feeling of vicissitudes, as if he had grown up a lot in just one day. Aman had been silent for the past few days. Today, When he burst into tears in the cavemen all felt a little scared and inexplicable uneasiness. Some even guessed that the heavy rain at the foot of the mountain was the tears of the gods. They breathed a sigh of relief when they saw Amon come out of the cave, safe and sound. To Link's surprise, Amon asked him for wine for the first time. Link immediately went to get the wine. He put it in the delicate copper bottle given by Amon and sent it to Amon's big straw hut. Amon did not know why he wanted to drink. Maybe it was because he missed his drunkard father. But that night, he did not want to drink anymore. He sat there with the bottle in his hand, deep in thought. Crazy Ol said that the whole continent was waiting for him to explore, but Amon felt that he had nowhere to go. The future was a mess, and there was only one path in front of him. If he did not want to be a false god in this caveman tribe, he had to follow Crazy Ol's wish to become a sorcerer and unlock the secrets of the gods. Even if he could not find Bear, he could at least repeat what Bear had done. People had to do something in life. Amon could not think of any other choice. He stood up and sighed. Crazy Ol, you knew what would happen. Did you arrange all this? You're so cruel, but I can't hate you. Since he did not want to drink anymore, Amon never wasted anything. It had become an unconscious habit. He put the rest of the bottle into Schrödinger's grass nest. Schrödinger had been squatting in the grass nest, watching him. When it saw Amon take the wine, it turned over and dozed off. It seemed that it was not interested in the wine of the caveman. These days, Amon had been taking good care of the cat. Unconsciously, Schrödinger became thinner and thinner. Its body became slim and healthy, and its fur became sleek and beautiful. It was no longer the lazy, fat and dirty cat in Duck. The changes were slow and unnoticeable. But when Amon looked at Schrödinger, he suddenly realized that the cat had changed too much. It was not just a cat that had changed. The whole town of Duck was wiped out by the flood, and Amon was no longer the boy he was a few months ago. Schrödinger had been following Amon all day, staring at him. Was it afraid that something bad would happen to him? Did it care about him? In any case, this cat was Amon's only childhood companion in Duck, and it would continue to be with him. No one knew why, but Amon reached out and held Schrödinger in his arms. He stroked its back and said softly, "The town of Duck is gone. Everyone is gone. Now it's just you and me." Schrödinger was startled by Amon's sudden movement. It seemed very reluctant to be held and stroked by Amon like this. Its sharp claws stretched out from the pads of its toes, and it raised its claws to scratch Amon's arm. But when it heard his words, it did not really scratch. It just wriggled unhappily. Amon saw that the cat was very uncomfortable in his arms. He sighed and put it down again. Then he sat in the room and began to practice magic meditation. Only when his body and mind were in a peaceful state could he temporarily forget the sadness of the world. Amon could already practice some advanced magic. Apart from elemental magic, he had always been most interested in spatial magic and message magic, both of which had something to do with the special parangons left by Crazy Ol. However, a level 3 mage couldn't practice these two divine incantations yet, so he chose to practice detection divine incantations tonight. The foundation of these two types of magic was detection magic, especially message magic, which was a branch of detection magic that was practiced to the highest level. Amon already had some understanding of detection magic, so it was easy for him to practice the most basic, detection eye. He did not need to see or listen. Everything around him was so clear in the darkness. However, Amon seemed to be disturbed by something. He suddenly opened his eyes and stood up, interrupting the magic he had just mastered. It was common sense for any mage that the puppet eye could sense things much more clearly than what they usually saw or heard. But Amon was surprised to find that two things were missing in the room. Schrödinger and the strange bone in the grass were not there at all. You're tuning in to the Blissful Bookshelf YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.